Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause, well more than a year since Alison Thewlis, my colleague, Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.
Our first item of business today is Time for Reflection, and our Time for Reflection leader is the Reverend Duncan J. Macpherson, Senior Chaplain Scotland and Deputy Assistant Chaplain General for the 51st Infantry Brigade.
Presiding Officer, members of the Scottish Parliament, it is a deep honour to offer this reflection before Remembrance Sunday and Armistice Day. As a Church of Scotland minister called to serve as an army chaplain, it's no surprise that these opportunities in the life of our nation and her communities to pause, reflect on the horrors of war, honour the fallen and dedicate ourselves to a better future are significant to me. It has been my privilege to lead acts of remembrance in parishes and in military service, in communities here, overseas and on operations. And I am deeply proud that Scots, wherever they are, still wish to pause, to remember who and what has formed their past, influences their present, and shapes their future. In the darkest hours and most desperate of circumstances, there are people of hope we can look to as our examples. The Reverend Donald Caskey, who was the Tartan Pimpernel of the Scots Kirk in Paris in 1940, who operated an escape route for service personnel, was caught and interned in France and Italy. Or the Reverend Murdo Ewan MacDonald, another Church of Scotland minister who volunteered to serve in North Africa, was wounded and captured, sent to Stalag Luft III, and there cared for American prisoners of war and played a part in the Great Escape. Or even a previous moderator of the General Assembly of the Church of Scotland, the very Reverend J. Fraser McCluskey, Military Cross, who deployed from Scotland in 1944 to parachute behind enemy lines in France with the SAS as their chaplain. What was it about those Scots that enabled them to endure under interrogation, live in appalling conditions, or serve behind enemy lines facing threat and constant danger that called them to risk all in service alongside countless thousands from Scotland and beyond? I believe it is the same thing that keeps the armed forces serving now, hope. Hope that when called upon, we will make a difference for the better. These chaplains dared to hope in darkness because they and I believe in God who offers hope in Jesus Christ. A life that can be deeper, richer, and full of a freedom that has little to do with circumstance and everything to do with community. We stand on the shoulders of those who have gone before, daring to build on their example of faith engendering hope that strives for a better future.
Thank you. Our next item of business is this motion S5M19729 in the name of Graham Day on behalf of the Parliamentary Bureau, setting out a revision to today's business. Could I call on Graham Day to move this motion?
Moved, Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. And no member wishes to speak against the motion. The question, therefore, is that motion 19729 be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed. Thank you. That's just bringing decision time forward to 4:35, 25 to 5. Thank you. Moving on now to topical questions. Our first question is from Tom Arthur.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the Scottish Affairs Committee report recommendation to introduce legislation to lawfully pilot a supervised drug consumption facility in Scotland.
Minister Joe Fitzpatrick.
Scottish Affairs Committee inquiry into problem drug use in Scotland supports our view that what we face in terms of drug deaths is an emergency and that the Misuse of Drugs Act should be amended to allow a range of public health focused responses. The need for this type of service and the evidence supporting it has been further reinforced during this inquiry. These facilities can save lives and I urge the UK Government to take the necessary steps to either support a pilot facility or devolve the powers to Scotland so that this Parliament can take these actions to save lives.
Tom Arthur.
Can I thank the Minister for that answer? He and other members of the Chamber will note that the report criticises the Tory UK Government for, and I quote, routinely ignoring evidence on what would be the most effective approach to reducing problem drug use, as well as blocking proposals to introduce drug consumption rooms in Scotland, despite witnesses saying that, and I quote, the case for such a facility in Glasgow is amongst the most compelling in Europe. Does the Minister agree with me that this is a shameful approach?
Minister.
Yes, I do. I strongly agree, and I just do not understand how the UK Government, which has recognised the benefits of these facilities, can stand in the way of saving lives. There's a strong body of evidence from a number of countries that these facilities prevent fatal overdoses and encourage engagement with services. Furthermore, a range of health professionals and experts from across the UK gave evidence to state that this is the most important thing that Glasgow could do. The UK Government's own advisory group, the ACMD, the Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs, supports their introduction, and in recent weeks, 2 separate UK Parliament committees have strongly recommended that these facilities should be introduced.
Tom Arthur.
Presiding Officer, there are over 20,000 people in Scotland with hepatitis C, 10,000 of whom we believe are not being diagnosed. We know that HIV still remains a public health challenge. We know that drug consumption facilities can help us tackle these public health challenges and ultimately, as the Minister said, save lives. So does the Minister agree with me that whatever government we end up with at Westminster in December, they must treat this issue with the urgency that it warrants, or better still, devolve the necessary powers to this Parliament?
Minister.
Absolutely. I absolutely call on the incoming UK Government to amend the Misuse of Drugs Act or to devolve the powers which will allow this Parliament to take a range of public health focused initiatives which will save lives. Clearly, these proposals could save lives across the United Kingdom. I think the UK Government should be taking a public health approach to drugs everywhere in the UK, but if they won't do it, then please devolve these powers so this Parliament can make these decisions.
Liam Kerr, to be followed by Monica Lennon.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can the Minister tell us what research has been done to assess the impact of the SNP's decision to cut £15 million from alcohol and drug partnerships 4 years ago on the delivery of those services?
Minister.
The member will be well aware that in 2018 the government increased the budget by £20 million, and just this year in the programme for government, the First Minister has agreed that we will increase the budget for the next 2 years by an additional £20 million.
Monica Lennon, to be followed by Liam MacArthur.
The Scottish Affairs Committee report noted benefits of de facto decriminalisation programmes elsewhere in the UK. The Lord Advocate has acknowledged that he has the power to extend the scope of Police Scotland's current de facto decriminalisation policy to drugs other than cannabis. Given the committee's endorsement of such programmes, is the Minister supportive of such an extension, and will he commit to working with the Lord Advocate to make it a reality?
Thank you, Member, for her question. Obviously, this is one of the areas of work that the Drugs Death Task Force is looking at, and the Crown are part of that task force to make sure we can look at what more we can do within the powers that we have in this Parliament. But I do think it's important that we look further afield as well. What more could we do? And we should use every single lever possible, either that are within the power of this Parliament or in the power of Westminster, in order to save lives.
Liam MacArthur, to be followed by Bob Doris.
Thanks very much, Presiding Officer. Following on from Monica Lennon's question, it wasn't just the Lord Advocate that made the case for this. I think ACC Steve Johnson said that Police Scotland could consider a diversion scheme that was wider than the recorded police warning system, as is currently the case in Thames Valley and Durham. So can the Minister commit to this Parliament that the Government will take specific action to pursue this option?
Minister.
I think it is always important that we remember the different responsibilities of Parliament, Government and the Crown in these matters. But as I said to Monica Lennon, it is important that the Crown are part of the Drug Death Task Force in terms of looking at how we can make a difference here. I think there is also a wider issue about whether we can look at other models around decriminalisation from other parts of the world. And I think it's appropriate that this Parliament is able to have those sorts of discussions, looking at what's happened in places like Portugal, in terms of saving lives, where we've seen an absolutely massive turnaround. But I can give the member the assurance that the Crown are part of the Drugs Death Task Force because they want to be part of looking at what the solutions can be.
Bob Doris.
Presiding Officer, when I last met the Minister to discuss the drugs death crisis with Reverend Brian Casey in Springburn, both myself and Reverend Casey were deeply concerned at the relative ease and affordability of being able to purchase a pill press to mass-produce the potentially lethal so-called street Valium. We hope there could be action in this area. Presiding Officer, can I ask the Minister, can he update me any action the Scottish Government can take regarding this area?
Minister.
We know that criminal gangs in Scotland are using these machines to produce vast quantities of street benzodiazepines, which are having devastating effects on communities across Scotland. And I'm fully committed to taking any possible action that may help save lives of those most at risk as a result of their drug use. I've instructed my officials to explore what options are available under current devolved powers to tackle the sale and regulations of these machines, and I hope I would receive support from across the chamber.
Thank you very much. We move on to question 2, Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the Scottish Government what urgent action it plans in response to recent reports of a rise in stress-related sickness absence amongst prison officers.
Cabinet Secretary Hamza Youssef.
The Scottish Government recognises the importance of providing a safe environment for those living and working in our prisons. Prison officers work in a difficult and intensive environment which can at times be dangerous. The Scottish Prison Service provides a range of measures and interventions to those who require them. This includes occupational health, support and access to counselling services. Absence at SPS was increasing month on month for over 2 years. There's now positive signs that this trend may be reversing, with slight reductions at the end of August and September. Scotland's prisons are stable, they're safe and well run. That is very much to the credit of prison officers and staff across the country. I'm very grateful for their unwavering dedication and commitment. I was pleased that the agreement was reached for 2019 to 2022. This reflects the important contribution made by staff in our prisons, and it rightly sees the lowest paid staff in our prisons receive a pay increase of up to 6% in the first year and 15% over 3 years. As part of that pay deal, agreement was reached on wider reforms, including the introduction of a new attendance management policy, which should directly help to tackle the very issue the member raises.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary for the answer. Overcrowding in prisons, combined with an increase in violence, mental health issues and the use of psychoactive substances, has all raised the key factors within the sickness level. And some staff feel adequately skilled or trained to deal with some of the issues that they are confronted with. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, it's quite obvious that there is an urgent requirement for some priority here. Will he agree to that?
Cabinet Secretary.
I do agree with this urgency, and can I thank Alexander Stewart for asking the question. I know when his time as a councillor he took a real interest in issues around our prisons, and he's right, of course, there are a range of factors. If there was one factor that could be dealt with, if there was one silver bullet, one panacea, we would have found that. There clearly isn't. There's a range of factors. I do think some of the work that SPS is currently doing to try to tackle this is really important. So, for example, This includes telephone and face-to-face counselling. I think it's really important that that is provided to staff. I know there's also been a pilot of a variety of occupational health interventions as well, and they're being evaluated to see if they could be rolled out right across the prison estate. Furthermore, as well as the mental health issues, which the member is right to focus on, it's worth also mentioning the physical health demands of such a job. We know that approximately 15,000 days per annum are lost to musculoskeletal conditions. So therefore, SPS is introduced in HMP Edinburgh and HMPY and YOI Pullman free physiotherapy services to staff. And that has been very, very positive. And again, there will be consideration of rolling that out further as well. So I agree with Alexander Stewart. There's an urgency to it. That's where work is already taking place. We've seen in the last couple of months a more positive trend, but clearly still a lot more for us collectively to do.
Alexander Stewart.
I thank the Cabinet Secretary. The fact is, Cabinet Secretary, that in the last year alone, stress-related sickness has gone up by nearly 1/3. And the fact is that prison officers are quitting altogether because for some of them, the thought of going back is too much to bear. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary to guarantee that staff will get the vital resources, support and training they need to ensure that they can fulfil that job?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, we have invested where the prison service tell us they need more financial resource. This year alone, we've invested an additional 24 million into the prison service. That was coming from the prison service, that they needed that additional funding because of the pressures that they face with the overcrowding problem. So I can give an absolute assurance to Alexander Stewart and indeed any other member across this chamber that when the prison service come to me and they tell me that they have an urgent issue that needs dealt with, then this government is going to listen to them. And that is demonstrated by that historic pay deal of 15% over 3 years for prison officers who do an excellent job. And all of us, including the government here, I'm sure recognise that increasingly difficult job.
And Shona Robertson.
Does the Cabinet Secretary agree with me that prison officers do an incredible job and should be recognised for the important work they do in often difficult circumstances, as I saw for myself when I visited Barlinnie this morning with the Justice Committee? While the Scottish Government is committed to reducing the prison population by introducing a presumption against short sentences, can the Cabinet Secretary tell the Chamber what impact the Conservative policies on justice would have on our prison capacity?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, I mean, it is a fair point, and Alexander Stewart in his remarks acknowledged that overcrowding was part of one of the factors involved in staff sicknesses and absence, and we are absolutely committed, and I as Justice Secretary am absolutely committed to reducing our prison numbers. If I took Conservatives' recent justice policies of ending automatic early release for short sentences, whole life sentences, and indeed their opposition to presumption against short sentences, we would increase the prison population by about 40%. Prison population would rise to about 11,500. And as far as I'm aware, the Conservatives can tell me otherwise, they have never announced any policy to build an additional prison. So therefore, that 40% increase would have to be managed within our current prison. You'd have to build 3 new Barlinnies at least to cope with that kind of demand. So if they think the overcrowding position is affecting staff now, with the Conservative policies, they would not only be exacerbated, they would be at the point, I think, frankly, of breaking point.
Thank you. Question number 3, Angela Constance.
To ask the Scottish Government what its response is to the report by the All-Party Political Group on Deaths Abroad, Consular Services and Assistances, why families in the UK deserve better and what can be done.
Minister Ben Macpherson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Scottish Government, of course, recognises the difficulties faced by Scottish families who suffer the death of a loved one abroad. And ministers have met a number of times with families to discuss their experiences. We are grateful to the All-Party Parliamentary Group for their very serious piece of work on this very serious and emotive issue. And while it is the role of the Foreign and Commonwealth Office to provide consular support, the Scottish Government is committed to exploring this issue further and identifying where support can be improved. We will therefore carefully consider the report's findings and how we can work alongside the UK Government departments and other key agencies and stakeholders to improve how victims and their families are supported following the death of a relative overseas. And I'm sure I speak with the whole chamber that our thoughts remain with the many families who have lost a loved one in these circumstances.
Angela Constance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thanks to the Minister. This report is based on the lived experience of 60 families who've had the trauma of a loved one dying abroad. And as it's crucial that we all now move from expressing our condolences to taking action, will the Minister commit to fully informing Parliament of his considerations given to all the germane recommendations, including the Pearson-Maxwell Protocol recommended to help with the costs of translation, emergency travel and repatriation when not covered by travel insurance?
Minister.
This is a very comprehensive and detailed report, as I said previously, which sets out the experience of many families, as Angela Constance has said. And I'm sure she will appreciate that as a government as a whole, we want to take time to properly consider the report's various recommendations. That said, I want to be clear that we are open-minded at looking at the various ways to help support families who have lost a loved one abroad. Complications with repatriation and the costs involved are clearly a common issue for many families. And this is something that the Victim Surcharge Fund may be able to assist with. Although, given the fund's legal focus on supporting families of crime, it may be difficult to use it to support cases where there has been an accidental death. However, that being said, we will look at the recommendations in the report, this recommendation in the report that Angela Constance referred to in detail as part of a wider evaluation and consideration of the report's full recommendations and respond as appropriate.
Angela Constance.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Both the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and the First Minister were kind enough to meet with my constituents, the family of Kirsty Maxwell, and they know, therefore, how abandoned this family feel. Therefore, will the Minister agree to extend the Families Bereaved service to include those who have lost a loved one abroad due to murder, manslaughter or indeed suspicious circumstances, and that this would help create a more comprehensive and trauma-informed service for families like Kirsty's?
Minister.
The Victim Support Scotland's service for families bereaved by crime is providing dedicated and continuous support for families bereaved by murder or culpable homicide. And at present, cases involving a death abroad are out with the scope of this service, as the report notes. The service is in its first year of operation and has already expanded its scope to ensure availability of support for families where the death may have occurred some time ago, but there is ongoing interaction with the justice system, for example, in relation to temporary release or parole. We are open-minded about the possibility of recommendation 5E, but we are also very keen to ensure that the impact of any further changes to the scope of this fund would be well understood and adequately resourced. And so we will consider recommendation 5E as part of our very serious analysis of the recommendations as a whole. The Cabinet Secretary for Justice and the Cabinet Secretary for External Affairs will meet soon to discuss the recommendations in this report, and also look to engage with the new UK government when established on these issues too. And officials are already engaged with Foreign and Commonwealth Office officials on the recommendations in this report. And the Justice Secretary has also just informed me that he would be happy to meet with Angela Constance to discuss this report at an appropriate point in the near future.
Thank you very much. And that concludes topical questions. Thank you. So the Next item of business is a Stage 1 debate on motion 19701 in the name of Ben Macpherson on the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill. Could I invite all members who wish to contribute to this debate to press their request to speak buttons? And I call on the Minister, Ben Macpherson, to speak to and move the motion.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer, and I'm very glad to open this debate on Stage 1 of the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill and to seek Parliament's backing for the general principles of the bill. Presiding Officer, the UEFA European Championship is a remarkable sporting event that attracts global audiences. And in June and July next year, in 2020, we look forward to seeing the best of football at Hampden Park as part of one of the biggest sporting events in the world. The Scottish Government and our partners in the local organising committee for the event are delighted to be involved in the 60th anniversary of the event, which will provide a Euro for Europe, with 12 cities hosting matches, including Glasgow, across the continent. And we look forward to welcoming others from across Europe to our shores and enjoying the tournament together. Presiding Officer, Glasgow and Scotland have a strong track record of successfully delivering major global sporting events, which brings significant benefits, not just to our economy, but for our international reputation too. Importantly, we expect that the excitement and memories that the Championship will create will be on a par with those surrounding other famous football matches that have taken place in Glasgow. And the impact will be magnified if, as we hope, Scotland manage to qualify to the Nations League playoffs. Presiding Officer, hosting a major event often involves meeting certain requirements to the rights holder. And the bill that we are debating today seeks to help to ensure the successful delivery of Euro 2020 in line with UEFA's requirements for all 12 host cities. The bill will protect commercial rights in relation to ticket touting, street trading and advertising. And the bill also contains measures in relation to enforcement. The bill provides for 3 event zones in Glasgow for fans to enjoy the occasion, where the street trading and advertising restrictions will also apply. And I recognise that a key area of interest for Parliament and those affected by the bill will be where these zones are. And for that reason, I shared draft maps of the proposed Hampden Park, George Square and Merchant City event zones with the committee during Stage 1. I have also shared illustrative regulations to indicate how the Scottish Government expects to use the powers included in the bill, and I welcome any feedback on these. Turning now to scrutiny of the bill. The timescales for consideration of the bill are shorter than as usual, which has made scrutiny more challenging, and I appreciate that. So I would like to begin by commending and thanking the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee for the very diligent way it has undertaken Stage 1 consideration. The committee heard from a range of stakeholders about the bill, and I'd also like to thank those organisations for contributing to this process. I'd also like to thank the Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee and the Finance Committee for their consideration of the bill. We now have the Stage 1 report, and I welcome the League Committee's unanimous support for the general principles of the bill. I think we all have the same aim, that is making sure that the bill plays its part in delivering a fantastic event. And in that spirit, I will now say more about the Government's thinking on some of the matters raised in the report. I particularly want to focus on the timescales and plans for evaluation of the bill, the enforcement powers, and our proposals for ticket touting. And finally, I'd like to talk briefly about engagement on the bill. Firstly, timescales and evaluation. You may be aware that the Scottish Government and its partners were working to establish whether it would be possible to meet UEFA's requirements without the need for additional primary legislation. However, after exploring this in detail with UEFA, it was confirmed only in April 2019 that a bill would be necessary to provide the level of protection UEFA required to host the event. The Scottish Government has been working swiftly to develop this bill since then. And in doing so, We have sought to learn from the Glasgow Commonwealth Games Act 2008, the most recent piece of legislation in Scotland for a major event. And subject to parliamentary approval, the Scottish Government is proposing that this bill completes its parliamentary process more quickly than usual, so that the secondary legislation can be laid early in 2020 in order to give those affected as much time as possible to prepare. And so thinking forward, I have committed to evaluate also how the legislation for Euro 2020 worked in practice after the event, so that this could help inform consideration of legislative requirements for future events in Scotland. Presiding Officer, moving next to enforcement, I would like to talk about the provisions which have been a key area of scrutiny during Stage 1. Consideration of this included, firstly, the range of powers that enforcement officers should have. Secondly, who should be able to be appointed as an enforcement officer. And thirdly, who should be able to assist an enforcement officer. And I welcome the feedback from the committee on these points, both in the Stage 1 report and when I appeared in front of committee. The enforcement provisions are almost identical to those contained in the Glasgow Commonwealth Games Act 2008 and are similar to enforcement powers already included in other pieces of Scottish and UK legislation. And they are also supported by Police Scotland. Nevertheless, I recognise from the committee's scrutiny and my own deliberations that it is possible to make these provisions clearer and that it may be helpful to strengthen protections in some areas. And as a result, the Scottish Government will bring forward amendments at Stage 2 in order to respond to a number of the points that have been raised by the committee. And I have set out in more detail my evaluation of this in my response to the committee's Stage 1 report, which includes adding criteria on the face of the bill to limit enforcement officers to people employed by Glasgow City Council or another local authority in Scotland. Moving on to ticket touting. Sadly, as we know, Presiding Officer, many major events can be blighted by ticket touts. And the Scottish Government, working in partnership with UEFA, wants to prevent this from happening for the Championship. And this bill will help to ensure fair access to tickets by creating a new criminal offence with a maximum fine of £5,000. This will act as a deterrent and will allow action to be taken to address ticket touting in person and, crucially, also electronically. Yes?
Mike Rumbles.
The comments the Minister made are absolutely welcome. Fully support them. But something else we raised in discussion at the committee, would he consider coming back to Parliament at a future date and putting into law on ticket outing generally what you're now putting into law for this specific event?
Yes. Thank Mike Rumbles for that intervention. And as I expressed at committee when a number of weeks ago, when I appeared in front of the committee, we will take learning from the successful delivery of this legislation based on parliamentary approval and in the operation of it to think about how a major events framework bill could work in the future, and ticket touting considerations would undoubtedly be part of that. So thank you. On the point of ticket touting, our proposals to ban ticket touting of championship tickets have also been broadly supported, including by football fans. The Association of Tartan Army Clubs wrote to the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee in October to convey their firm support for these measures. And it is, of course, not my intention to criminalise charity auctions of tickets, and I have committed to bring forward an amendment on this at Stage 2 to make that point clear, that charity auctions will be permitted. However, any form of charity sale, auction or promotional giveaway of a Euro 2020 ticket should be discussed with UEFA to ensure the ultimate holder of the ticket is not at risk of being refused entry to the stadium as a consequence of breaching UEFA's terms and conditions of sale. And the Scottish Government is working to raise awareness of this new offence so that fans understand how it works and will feel able to report touting activity to Police Scotland and enforcement officers. Finally, Presiding Officer, I think it's important to discuss engagement. And we will undertake further engagement and raise awareness of the other provisions in the bill in the way we are for ticket touting. Prior to introduction, the Scottish Government carried out targeted engagement with street traders and other businesses who could be affected, as it is essential they understand what is being proposed and have an opportunity to provide their views. Since the bill was introduced, further engagement has also taken place to help us understand the views of other groups, and importantly this includes discussions with the Association of Tartan Army Clubs, Supporters Direct Scotland and the Scottish Football Association, as we want to hear from football fans broadly as we can and is relevant. Engagement is also planned later this month with residents around Hampden Park on the preparations for the event as a whole, not only the possible implications of the bill. The Scottish Government, together with Glasgow City Council and other partners, intends to continue to publicise the restrictions on advertising, street trading and ticket touting in the run-up to the Championship to raise awareness among businesses and the public. Presiding Officer, I hope members can appreciate that despite the expedited timetable for this bill, a good deal of consideration and due care has been given to its drafting. The proposals on ticket touting have been broadly supported, and the proposals on street trading and advertising have been welcomed in the Stage 1 report on the bill. I, of course, view parliamentary scrutiny as extremely important and a vital way to improve the bill, and have responded positively to the majority of the recommendations from the committee about areas for amendment. So I look forward to engaging with members in a productive exchange of views today, and subject to parliamentary approval, to taking forward how we improve the bill at Stage 2. This is a really exciting opportunity for Glasgow to be one of the 12 host cities for this championship, with huge benefits for the local economy, for Scotland's economy, and for our reputation as an excellent nation for hosting world-class sporting events. And with regard to that and the aspiration of delivering the tournament well and the necessities that need to be undertaken in order to do that, I move that the Parliament agrees to the general principles of the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I now call on Joan McAlpine, convener of the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee, to open on behalf of the committee.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. It's a pleasure to speak in the debate on behalf of the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee. My committee unanimously agreed our report last Thursday, and it's symptomatic of the compressed timetable for this bill that this debate is taking place today. And in that regard, I'm reminded of the words of Leonard Bernstein, who said, "To achieve great things, two things are needed, a plan and not quite enough time." I want to thank all members of the committee and those who provided evidence to the committee for their support in scrutinising the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill within a constrained timetable, and of course, as always, to our clerks who worked so hard on getting the report out on time. The compressed nature of the timetable has affected me personally, because I had a long-standing meeting with the Transport Minister to support some of my constituents from Langham who have travelled to meet him today. And it means that I've alerted you to this, Presiding Officer, but I wanted to apologise to people speaking in the open part of the debate that I'm going to have to step out because my constituents have travelled a long way and I'm keen to support them today. The committee recognises the significant culture, tourism and social opportunities that hosting the matches at Hampden Park represents for Scotland. Nevertheless, Presiding Officer, the committee, as you would expect, does raise a range of issues within the bill in our Stage 1 report that I wish to explore in this debate, and which I'm sure my fellow committee members will want to expand upon further this afternoon. Presiding Officer, Euro 2020 is being hosted by 12 member associations of UEFA to mark the 60th anniversary of the European Championships. 4 matches will take place in Glasgow. To date, 5 countries are using primary legislation to meet UEFA's requirements for hosting Euro 2020 matches, while other jurisdictions, such as England, are using secondary legislation. The governance of hosting the Euro 2020 matches is undertaken by a local organising committee comprising representatives from the Scottish Football Association, Scottish Government, Glasgow City Council, Hampden Park Limited, Visit Scotland and Police Scotland. During the course of considering the bill, the committee became aware that the need for primary legislation had only become evident in April this year, despite individual members of the local organising committee, such as Glasgow City Council, having been aware that existing legislation would not be sufficient to meet UEFA's requirements. In contrast, the legislation for the 2014 Commonwealth Games was passed in 2008. The committee considered it regrettable that the local organising committee, including the Scottish Government, did not anticipate the need for legislation far sooner, given the Euro 2020 matches were awarded in 2014. However, I welcome the Minister's commitment in his Stage 1 response to learn from this experience. And I'm aware that this delay was certainly not connected to the Minister, who's only come into post recently. Presiding Officer, the bill contains a range of measures that seek to protect the commercial rights of UEFA and UEFA event sponsors. Specifically, the bill contains provisions that will put in place restrictions on ticket touting, street trading and advertising, as well as a range of provisions relating to the enforcement of these offences. These provisions replicate equivalent measures that were contained in the Commonwealth Games Act 2008. The measures in the bill with regard to ticket touting were supported in evidence that the committee received. However, the committee has sought to understand why the bill provides an exemption for UEFA, particularly as UEFA was clear when providing evidence to the committee that they have absolutely no intention of engaging in ticket touting, which I'm sure we all welcome. The committee recognises that the Minister considers that this provision is necessary to protect UEFA when reselling tickets on an online platform. Nevertheless, the committee does recommend that the Scottish Government reflect on whether the policy intention of the legislation can be made clearer via an amendment at Stage 2. The committee also welcomes commitments the Scottish Government has made to ensure that 2020 tickets are sold at above face value for charitable purposes, that those tickets are exempted from the tickets impacted by the street trading measures. Presiding Officer, as you will be aware, Glasgow boasts some of the finest street performers to be found anywhere in Europe, and I am therefore delighted that the Minister has committed to making busking and charity collections exemptions to the street trading offence. This can only help to add to the atmosphere that travelling fans will experience within the Euro 2020 event zones. Presiding Officer, a substantial proportion of the bill deals with the enforcement mechanisms designed to underpin the advertising, ticket touting and street trading offences. The bill proposes that enforcement officers are designated to enforce these offences as a practical measure to reduce the resource implications for Police Scotland during the championships. Concerns were expressed by some stakeholders, which replicates the approach taken for the 2014 Commonwealth Games regarding this approach. For example, the Scottish Police Federation considered that enforcement officers could blur the distinction between police officers and others who are exercising powers that resemble police powers. Enforcement officers will be local authority officers who deal with trading standards and consumer protection, and will be drawn primarily from Glasgow City Council in the first instance. The Minister recognised that this is not evident from the bill as currently drafted and has offered to make this position more explicit in the bill. The committee recommends that the Minister does bring forward such amendments at Stage 2. In addition, the bill proposes that an enforcement officer should be able to seek assistance from another person to assist them in their role without defining who these other persons might be. The committee considers this to be a potentially wide-ranging power. We therefore recommended that an enforcement officer, when seeking external expert assistance, should notify the police in advance of seeking such assistance. I recognise that the Minister has committed in his Stage 1 response to the committee's report to bring forward amendments at Stage 2 to make the enforcement provisions clearer and also to strengthen the protections in some areas. Presiding Officer, I know that public engagement is an issue that you attach great importance to. The Scottish Government recognise that due to the late recognition of the need for primary legislation, that there had not been sufficient time for a full public consultation prior to the introduction of the bill. Similarly, due to the constraints on the time available for scrutiny of the bill, there was limited scope for stakeholders to engage with the parliamentary process. The committee welcomes, therefore, the ongoing efforts of Glasgow City Council and the Scottish Government to undertake public engagement. The committee also welcomes the information distribution programme that UEFA intends to implement. However, the committee is unaware of any public engagement that has taken place with local community groups, residents or organisations representing football fans to date. Accordingly, the committee recommends that the Scottish Government and Glasgow City Council should consult with these groups. Presiding Officer, I want to consider briefly the issue of the approach that is taken to legislate for major events. The committee welcomes the success that Scotland has had in recent years in attracting major events. The committee also recognised that this remains an ongoing objective for the Scottish Government. The Minister has referred to the Commonwealth Games Act 2008 as the gold standard for such legislation. However, the committee is aware that no formal evaluation of the operation of the 2008 Act has been undertaken. The committee has recommended that there should be a formal evaluation of the operation of this legislation following next summer's Euro 2020 tournament. The use of individual pieces of legislation to host major events was questioned in evidence to the committee. For example, the Law Society of Scotland observed that if we have weaknesses, we should address them in a substantive way rather than in a way that involves periodically coming up with sticking plasters, if that is an appropriate descriptor, when large-scale events come around. The committee considers that if there are weaknesses in devolved legislation, that these should be addressed in a substantive manner rather than in a piecemeal fashion. Accordingly, the committee has recommended that the Scottish Government should give serious consideration to developing an events framework bill following formal evaluation of the operation of this bill, and I recognise that the Minister has already addressed that in the earlier intervention. Presiding Officer, the committee recognises the significant cultural, economic and social opportunities that hosting Euro 2020 matches will represent for Scotland. The committee hopes that our scrutiny of this legislation will improve the approach taken with regard to legislating for future hosting of major events. And in closing, Presiding Officer, I know that for some of my fellow committee members, to quote that doyen of Scottish football managers, Tommy Docherty, football is a lovely incurable disease. While I know that Glasgow will make a huge success of hosting Euro 2020, the only thing I consider that will enhance the experience of hosting the tournament in Glasgow will be for Scotland to qualify for the tournament. Unfortunately, Presiding Officer, that is an issue over which the committee has no influence, although you may well consider that is probably just as well. The committee does, however, support the general principles of the bill. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr McAlpine, and I call Rachel Hamilton to open for the Conservatives.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The 16th UEFA European Championship is an exciting opportunity for Scotland to celebrate the tournament's 60th birthday. 12 cities across Europe have been selected as hosts, from Amsterdam to Munich. Hampden Park won the bid, as we've heard today, to host matches during the 2020 European Championships. And as the Scottish Conservatives tourism spokesperson, I'm delighted that Glasgow will be able to take advantage of the opportunities that come from fans visiting Glasgow and the surrounding area, bringing in much needed tourism and contributing to the local economy. Today we address the bill which will allow all of this to happen. The bill will address areas of Scots law which do not meet UEFA standards of protecting sponsors' commercial interests. It covers restrictions on ticket touting, street trading and advertising in relation to the UEFA European Championships 2020. Crucially, the bill must be brought in to ensure the successful delivery of the championships by meeting commitments required by UEFA in relation to commercial rights for event sponsors during the period of the event. On these benches, we support the bill. and very grateful to the Culture Committee for their hard work. However, we do have some concerns of its potential impact, and we'd like to see some clarification from the Scottish Government around the hours of operation and the precise geographical limits of the event zones, as well as the concerns around the European Convention on Human Rights. I'll address the issues raised through the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee evidence sessions and submissions around the impacts on local businesses, residents and the enforcement of legislation. Presiding Officer, we are already familiar with the process of introducing legislation in relation to hosting major sporting and cultural events. The successful Glasgow Commonwealth Games back in 2014 saw the Scottish Parliament also pass legislation in the build-up to Glasgow hosting these games. And this legislation was prepared much further in advance of the event, and an extensive public consultation was carried out, which would have been more beneficial for Glasgow residents in order to prepare and feed in their input into the conversation surrounding the event zones and the trading licences. First and foremost, however, it's those who live in the vicinity of Hampden and near other event zones that must be given priority. Conservative Glasgow City Councillors have raised these issues, and I believe there should have perhaps been better consultation. But moving on, we now must take note of the disruptions and changes to servicing for residents in those areas which will be likely, and to minimise the impact of road closures and also deliver a safe and secure event is the challenge in this situation. Members of the Mount Florida Community Council have been instrumental in providing evidence to the committee and made their views clear. They raised a number of points, most importantly that the economic benefits of Hampden events which have been gained elsewhere in Scotland, for example, hotels in the Glasgow city centre rather than the local area, like any area around a major venue, there are issues which spill out onto the local streets too. There are also, they also raise the impact on everyday life for residents, something that the Conservative Councillor group in Glasgow City Council also brought up with me, similar to when the rugby is on at Murrayfield, for example. Residents endure traffic chaos and parking restrictions, and due to the trains not running on time or even at all in some cases, then they'll have the double impact of bad parking and increased traffic flow on the roads. I believe that in the run-up to the matches, there must be better engagement with the local community to ensure that everybody is on board. And residents also raised concerns over the powers granted to enforcement officers to enter and search private property, which could breach the European Convention on Human Rights, as it affects individual rights to respect for private and family life. And perhaps the Minister might address some of those issues, but they'll also be addressed as we go forward with the bill too. Presiding Officer, it's been clear that the bill has raised the local issues that I've just discussed, especially around the event zones and the impact on local businesses. We've seen stakeholder engagement on this front with the local organising committee, which is being established to deliver the event in Glasgow, and we must take their advice on board. As well as Hampden, 2 further event zones are being created in George Square and the Merchant City. There are currently no street trading licences issued in the Merchant City or George Square event zones. However, there are 113 licences for street traders who will be impacted by the proposed Hampden Park events zone. And I'm glad, as per section 9 of the bill, that Glasgow City Council will have to work with traders affected by the championship, something which our Glasgow City Council has put pressure on the administration to do so. Glasgow City Council has also said it will allow alternative trading arrangements in the Hampden Park event zone, and traders will be obligated to comply with the licensing application process should they wish to trade in an alternative location. Briefly returning to the issue of the European Convention on Human Rights restrictions on street trading and advertising, this could inhibit businesses' peaceful enjoyment of possessions and businesses to thrive as a result of the increased footfall not to suffer. It's an opportunity for them not to miss. The committee looked at how the bill should not prevent established local businesses from advertising such products or services in their windows or immediately outside their premises. In the past, there have been instances where small retailers have gone out of business due to cordons and zones applied during the Olympics and other major events, and due to temporary inaccessibility for deliveries and customers. And we mustn't allow this to happen in Glasgow, and this should be taken seriously when making regulations and defining the various geographical limits of those event zones. It's incumbent on those making these regulations that all these factors are taken into consideration. Ticket touting has been touched on. That's a very important subject that I'm glad to hear that the government are on board with, and that we don't want ticket touting to spoil the experience of those attending the UEFA matches. And thankfully, the bill seeks to address this. Scots law already has some restrictions around ticket touting, but these relate only to causing a public annoyance to the person being approached to purchase the ticket, or others who have reasonable grounds to be annoyed by the sale. These existing restrictions do not meet UEFA's requirements, as we already discussed, and through discussion with UEFA and the Scottish Government, determined that primary legislation was necessary to fully meet the requirements for hosting the Games for the 2020 Championship. As demand for ticket is expected to exceed supply, the aim of the bill is to provide a deterrent to anyone who seeks to make a profit from the resale of the tickets, and to provide a basis for both preventative and punitive actions in the event of any breaches. We here on these benches support fair access to tickets, so as many people as possible can enjoy the matches. And making touting a criminal offence for the event will ensure that it is a successful event, and that anyone who, the ticket touts who sell at overinflated prices privately or through secondary sites, that will be made a criminal offence. I do also believe that individuals who are well-meaning and ticket touts should also be clearly distinguished, and I think that will be something that will be perhaps looked at. The question remains, how can the ticket touts be ousted? But, in conclusion, Presiding Officer, on these benches we support the bill in principle, but we want the Scottish Government to look closely at the impact of the event zones on local residents and businesses. We've heard concerns of Mount Florida Community Council, Police Scotland and others as to how this bill can be strengthened to ensure that the businesses and local communities around Hampden are comfortable with the new legislation and the implications it will bring for them. And we want these championships to bring out the best possible opportunities, economic benefits, and put Glasgow on the map. At the same time, the bill must allow local people's needs to be brought on board. The bill must also not contravene European Convention on Human Rights, and clarification must be given there too. We'll vote tonight to ensure that this bill passes on to stage 2. And on a final note, all we need now is for the Scotland team to qualify. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I call on Claire Baker to open for the Labour Party.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Sorry, I have a bad cold. Hopefully people can hear what I'm saying this afternoon. I am pleased to open this afternoon's debate for the Labour Party and happy to confirm that we will be supporting stage 1 of the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill. Next year is the 60th anniversary of the European Championship, and to mark this landmark, the Championship will take place across 12 countries. It is a testament to Glasgow that it has been chosen as one of the host cities, with 4 fixtures due to take place at the National Teams Park at Hampden. This is one of the largest sporting events in the world, and the announcement that Glasgow was selected to be part of this special year for the tournament was very positive and well deserved. Scotland showed itself to be a perfect venue for major sporting events during the 2014 Commonwealth Games. Our infrastructure was good, our welcome was warm, and even the weather cooperated. The previous Scottish Executive and the Scottish Government, along with partners Glasgow City Council, demonstrated vision and ambition for Scotland's role on the world sporting stage, and the success of the Games helped secure our position as a competitive location. The UEFA Euro Championship will provide an economic boost to Glasgow and to Scotland. Accommodation and hospitality sectors will benefit, and there are opportunities to persuade people to stay longer in Scotland and take advantage of all we have to offer. We can anticipate there will be cultural and social benefits, and the committee have welcomed the assurances we have had that busking will be admissible within the event zones. But there's also the opportunity for sharing all the cultural activities and the nighttime economy that Glasgow offers. I've had a look at the UEFA website, which has promotional videos for each city, and note that it includes the fact that Edinburgh is only 70 kilometres, this is aimed at a European market, away from Glasgow, so the benefits can extend across Scotland. It seems no debate can avoid Brexit, but these kind of international events, which bring people together through social interaction, are important for fostering cooperation and understanding, and recognising our place in Europe, whatever the future holds. Games take place in Glasgow and London, with the semi-finals and the final taking place at Wembley. We must show ourselves to be a welcoming and inclusive country here in Scotland and across the UK, and enjoy this celebration of world-class football. There have been some ugly scenes in European football in recent months, and we must make clear, and so must UEFA, that racism and antisocial behaviour has no place in the game or in the festivities that will surround it. As a member of the committee, I understand and share some of the concerns raised by the convener. I will focus on a few of the issues she has raised and the responses we have received from the government. As the Minister has recognised, the timescale for consultation and scrutiny has been challenging. I thank those who submitted written evidence and those who were able to attend the committee at short notice. It is very disappointing that more time was not available to consider the legislation. Every piece of legislation should have adequate time for consideration. While there are occasions where it is necessary to fast-track a bill, and the argument is made that this is one of them, that should be avoided. And while the Minister has provided an explanation for the state of affairs, it is unfortunate, and the committee are not totally convinced that it wasn't avoidable. While the legislation is similar to that introduced for similar reasons for the Commonwealth Games, it was unfortunate that the government were unable to provide much analysis of how the legislation had operated during the Commonwealth Games. That may be because there appeared to have been no significant issues, but it was only in recent months that there has been any attempt to review the legislation, including the letter we received from the Crown Office that there were 4 reported cases of ticket touting during the Games. If there had been some evaluation, it may have been clearer to argue to the committee that this is a fairly straightforward piece of legislation which has already been tested and was effective. I welcome that the government have said they intend to learn from this experience. It could be that lack of time has caused some of these issues of concern. The Law Society highlight that it would have been helpful to include comparative details of similar measures being taken in England or other European countries in the initial bill documentation. Scotland is not unique in having to introduce primary legislation, but it does suggest a weakness in our ticket touting legislation that needs to be addressed. Ticket touting has had a high profile in recent years, particularly in terms of music events and the growth we have seen of online sales. I welcome the government's response to the committee's questions about online ticket touting, which sets out that someone could be refused entry unless the ticket has been purchased through a UEFA resale platform. There needs to be awareness raising of this so that fans are aware of the risk if they purchase a ticket in this way. It may be an effective way of deterring online ticket touting, which is very difficult to police, but I do recognise that the enforcement of existing consumer rights has seen an improved situation in recent months. This approach should be applied to all ticket touting, which is simply exploitation of fans. The area that has generated the most discussion is around the roles and responsibilities of enforcement officers and enforcement powers. The committee have made suggestions for a number of amendments. While the need for enforcement officers during the tournament is recognised, the concerns are over whether the powers are appropriate and the measures proportionate to the potential issues that may arise during the tournament, particularly in relation to entering domestic and non-domestic properties. The policing of the event and the ensuring the safety of those attending is the role of Police Scotland, and the tournament will require intensive policing resource. The role of enforcement officers should complement that of police officers, and so the legislation must be clear on the division of responsibilities. There are several areas where the committee sought assurances from the Minister, and the amendments proposed by the Minister are welcome. I am keen that this legislation has the confidence of Parliament, and we can then focus on the positive opportunities that the tournament brings. While there are lots of positive opportunities for the city, for tourism, hopefully for Scotland's national team, we should also recognise that for people who live within the event zones or close vicinity, there are some assurances that need to be made and an appreciation of any concerns they raise. It is welcome that there will now be an engagement session with residents around Hampden Park next week, and efforts must be made to keep them and other interested parties informed of all the impacts that will be in place during the period of the tournament. The Law Society briefing for today did raise questions about the seemingly piecemeal approach to hosting individual major events, And it is an issue also raised by the committee, who question whether a more strategic approach could be adopted, which would then cover any future events. It is anticipated and hoped that Scotland is in a good position to attract more international events, and there's been some positive announcements around that this afternoon, I understand. And the same issues will need to be addressed in a temporary manner unless legislation could be introduced to apply in all circumstances. At committee, the Minister said he would consider the need for an events framework bill. I would be interested in more detail when I've previously asked the Cabinet Secretary if we could have a Scottish solution to ticket touting. It is clear there are issues with reserved powers, including consumer protection, and this is reflected in the Government's response to the Stage 1 report. However, if there is a way to avoid introducing legislation for individual events, it would definitely be worth exploring whether these powers that we are using could be made permanent, or at least a system where they could be triggered when it became necessary. So, Presiding Officer, I look forward to this afternoon's debate, and I welcome the Government's response so far to the issues that the committee have raised.
Helps if you press the right button. I'm pressing mute. I'll get myself together now. I thank you very much, Ms Speaker. I now call on Ross Greer to open for the Greens. A generous 6 minutes.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We all welcome the opportunity for Scotland to host international sporting events. Our history in international football goes back as far as it's possible to go. The first ever international fixture was between Scotland and England, and it was hosted in Glasgow. And more recently, there was much to celebrate about the success of the Commonwealth Games, though I do think that they didn't quite have the overwhelmingly positive effect on the local community in the East End and on children and families' participation in sport that some have claimed. And that's a point this Parliament really should come back and explore further. But I certainly hope that hosting these UEFA matches will benefit the local economy in Glasgow and grassroots football on the south side, across the city and across Scotland. International tournaments are special because they can play a key role in developing the sport, driving new people to get involved, drawing more attention to the positives that it can provide. We only need to look at the long overdue boom in interest in women's football after Scotland qualified for the World Cup in France this year. However, in seeking to host international events, we need to ensure that they're conducted fairly. Yes.
Stewart McMillan.
I thank Ross Greer for taking intervention, but I'm sure Ross Greer would want to agree with me that the interest was very much increased in women's football as a consequence of the Scotland's women team actually qualifying for the European Championships 2 years ago, first of all.
Ross Greer.
Absolutely, Stewart McMillan is quite correct that after a long period of women's football being, I think, frankly, undervalued, particularly by our media, the last few years and successes in multiple tournaments have really had an exponential impact, not just on women's football at the adult level, but particularly on getting young women involved, getting young women and girls involved in women's football at school level. But to come back to the concerns that have been raised around this bill, as it stands, the Greens do have serious concerns with the UEFA bill, concerns that are covered in the committee report. And first of all, I'd like to repeat the point that the committee did not have enough time to properly scrutinise the bill. We held 2 evidence sessions, we took limited written evidence, and frankly, it is to our clerks' credit that we did so much in so little time and that such a useful report was the result. But this rushed timescale was, I believe, avoidable, and I think this has been a disservice to Parliament. It was known upon winning the bid to host the Championship in 2014 that legislation may be required. That was 5 years ago. It was only finally confirmed with UEFA that primary legislation would definitely be required in April of this year, and it took a further 6 months for the bill to be drafted and laid before us. This isn't really an acceptable way to go about legislating. It's certainly not good practice. It's far more likely that a mistake will be made, that a piece of legislation will not be up to standard when Parliament does not have sufficient time to scrutinise. Mistakes have been made with legislation before, leading to good policies being scuppered. That not only undermines those policies, it undermines this Parliament as a whole. It's vital that we don't set a precedent where rushing legislation through Parliament becomes acceptable, and I welcome the Minister's comments around that. There are some aspects of this bill that are welcome, absolutely, such as the ban on ticket touting. But to be clear, there are also serious concerns. It is not a simple and uncontroversial piece of legislation. International sporting events inevitably bring with them corporate sponsors, multinational, multi-billion-pound companies seeking to make as much money as they can from association with the event. Coca-Cola, Heineken, MasterCard, Gazprom, they all want to use events like UEFA 2020 to advertise their product and their brand. And to protect these corporate sponsors from non-official advertisers or other brands, the bill sets out a range of specific offences and enforcement powers. New criminal offences are introduced on trading and advertising, along with fines of up to £20,000. The enforcement powers for these are potentially excessive and without appropriate oversight mechanisms. They're to be granted to council officials, but go beyond powers currently afforded to the police. This is a concerning move. The police have clear lines of accountability and oversight mechanisms in place. While those mechanisms certainly do not function perfectly, giving police-like powers to non-police officers who don't have equivalent oversight mechanisms leaves open scope for abuse. These powers include the power to seize and destroy property, to enter and to search premises, which can be undertaken on the low threshold of an enforcement officer acting on their own judgment if they think the action is appropriate. This would allow local authority officials to search premises or vehicle or container without a police officer present and even potentially without a warrant, acting only on suspicion that a corporate brand is being ripped off. These are broad and invasive powers. The Scottish Police Federation has explicitly criticised them, saying that, in their words, they are extraordinary, and they're in stark contrast to the very limited circumstances in which the police can usually enter and search without a warrant. And for these broad powers to be enacted for the protection of commercial rights is excessive and unjustified. It prioritises the protection of multi-billion-pound corporations over the rights of citizens. There is a particular contrast here between the oversight of police officers who are acting on the basis of their personal judgment versus the lack of oversight for enforcement officers acting under the same personal judgment as they are empowered by this bill. I'm still not quite convinced by their necessity. After all, UEFA confirmed to me in committee that they did not ask for them. UEFA had been clear that enforcement powers can remain with the police. Given that, this has clearly been a judgment motivated by issues of resource and proportionality. That's a nuanced debate and not one that we've had time to properly explore in a few weeks, which we're not exactly lacking in other pressing issues to occupy our time. Now, the Government has at least recognised these concerns and stated it will bring forward amendments at stage 2 to rectify some of the issues raised, and I think that's very welcome. However, it has simultaneously defended these provisions, stating that they were used for the Commonwealth Games. None of us want to vote against this bill, and the Greens will vote for its general principles at stage 1, but I would urge the Government to engage with members immediately on intended amendments. We all want to end up in the same place, but the Greens can't support the UEFA bill at stage 3 without meaningful changes to protect civil liberties and retain appropriate policing responsibilities with the police. We're all looking forward to hosting UEFA, even those of us who never thought we'd manage a 6-minute speech about a football tournament. So let's hope that we can get to that point in a spirit of consensus, maximising the good that hosting will do for Glasgow and for Scotland, whilst doing everything that we can, everything appropriate and within our powers, to ensure that our constituents' rights aren't undermined for the benefit of corporate sponsors. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I now call Mike Rumbles to open for Liberal Democrats a generous 6 minutes. Mr Rumbles, you'll be pleased to hear.
Thank you very much indeed, Presiding Officer. Everyone on the committee, and indeed everyone throughout the chamber, I hope, supports the Scottish Government's bill for the successful delivery of Euro 2020. It's important that this bill paves the way for a successful tournament. I want to see a successful tournament, and our job in this Parliament is to see a successful bill pass through all 3 stages to see that we do our part to aid a successful tournament. And that's where I come to the detail of the bill. When I looked through the bill as published prior to the committee taking evidence on it, I was surprised by a couple of issues within it which have already been addressed to some extent. Firstly, I commend the Government for Section 2, this section dealing with a ban on ticket touting for this event. Ticket touts have been making a pretty penny out of people for far too long. This is an activity that routinely fleeces people, and much more needs to be done to promote fair access to events and to protect people. People will wonder why the approach taken to the Euros next year shouldn't be the norm, and we do need to update our legislation to reflect this, so I'm pleased that some consideration is being made to do that. So well done, Scottish Government. You don't often hear me say that, do you, Richard? Yeah, but I'm saying it today. But subsection 2.4 goes on to say, and there are some issues here, the touting offence doesn't apply in relation to acts done by UEFA. This is clearly, as far as we can see, an unnecessary subsection. Giving evidence, UEFA insisted it would not engage in ticket touting, yet we've got this glaring exemption for ticket touting for UEFA in the bill. In our report, the committee asked the Government to reflect on whether amendments at stage 2 are necessary here. And I'm glad to see, in the Minister's written response received yesterday, that he will look at this again, and I would urge him to bring forward an amendment at stage 2 to remove this unnecessary provision. It just looks so bad as it stands. Secondly, there's been concern raised about the very wide-ranging powers that this bill gives to enforcement officers, and I hear what the Greens are saying. In particular, section 19, subsection 2 of the bill, and I quote, "An enforcement officer may take to a place entered by virtue of this section any other person or any equipment as may reasonably be required for the purposes of assisting the officer." Now, there was a view that if this provision was used, a police officer should be present. However, the committee decided to recommend that if this provision in the bill should be used, then a notification in advance to the police that it was to be used was sufficient. That was the committee's view. The government has interpreted this in their response as Police Scotland should be informed in advance. This was not what committee members intended, so I think there's been a slight misunderstanding here. Of course, if this was the case, then there could obviously be an unreasonable delay. The committee meant, I believe, I don't want to speak for the rest of the committee, but I interpreted it, that the police on the ground should be informed, the police there should be informed, so that it would be their decision to attend or not to attend, as the case may be. So I would ask, therefore, the Minister to reflect again on this recommendation and bring forward an amendment at stage 2 to reflect this. I do really think this is a really important point which could be addressed, that the Greens made too. My other point is a simple one. It seems to me that the government, in bringing forward this bill, has, to some extent, cut and pasted its details from previous legislation. It really says so in the Minister's response to us when he says the powers in the bill are almost identical to the Glasgow Commonwealth Games Act 2008. Quite so. But that Act went through this Parliament with even less notice than this bill, and as far as I'm led to believe, oral evidence was not taken in the process. The fact that no untoward events happened as a result was indeed fortunate. But that's not to say we would necessarily be so fortunate this time. The fact that it didn't happen doesn't mean to say that some unfortunate event couldn't happen as a result of this one. Our job as MSPs is to interrogate this legislation and to improve it, make suggestions to improve it, to ensure no unforeseen consequences happen as a result of the bill. Now, this is a good bill, and I'm glad the Minister is taking a reasonable approach to this bill, realising that the government doesn't have a monopoly of wisdom. And I look forward to the Minister bringing forward amendments at stage 2 to address the issues that we've highlighted today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Rumbles. Open debate, some time in hand for interventions. I call Annabel Ewing to be followed by Brian Whittle. Ms Ewing, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And as a member of the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee, I am pleased to have been called to speak in the Stage 1 debate this afternoon on the UEFA European Championship Bill. As we have heard, this bill is intended to meet the requirements of UEFA in terms of protection of commercial rights for event sponsors and to prohibit ticket touting during the forthcoming European Football Championship in 2020. This 60th anniversary of the championships is in fact to be held unusually across 12 cities in Europe, and I think it would be important to list all the cities to show what a tremendous honour it is to have Glasgow included in this illustrious list. So the 12 cities are Amsterdam, Baku, Bilbao, Bucharest, Budapest, Copenhagen, Dublin, London, Munich, Rome and St Petersburg. It will take place from 12th June to 12th July 2020, and Hampden Park in Glasgow will host 3 group matches on the 15th, the 19th and the 23rd of June, and I believe 1 round of quarterfinals on 30th of June. This, therefore, as has been recognised, presents a very significant opportunity for Glasgow as host city and indeed for Scotland to welcome all these football fans from across Europe to our country and to our largest city and to hopefully maximise the benefits, economic and social and otherwise, that will accrue. And I'm sure that we all wish to see that happen. The bill was introduced to the Parliament on 24 September 2019, and taking into account the October recess, there has indeed been limited time within which to scrutinise the bill, and I too would wish to thank indeed the committee clerks who have carried out a power of work here to ensure that we are at the stage 1 part of this process today. And indeed, the committee in its report has made its views known on that issue, and those points have been raised indeed as well this afternoon, so I will not belabour that particular point myself. But I would say, Presiding Officer, that we are where we are now, and the key objective going forwards must be to get this job done so that we get the bill passed in due course, and we can therefore enjoy the benefits of the European Championship being held in Glasgow. A number of issues indeed were raised by the committee, and I'm pleased to note that there has already been a positive reaction to a number of points raised by the committee members, both from the Scottish Government and from Glasgow City Council. And indeed, I think it should be welcomed that Glasgow City Council has in fact signalled its intention to consult widely in the 3 event zones, being Hampden Park, the Merchant City and George Square. And indeed, a specific event I noted on my Twitter feed last week, in committee in fact, when I was looking for some factual reference, of course, for the committee deliberations, but I noted that indeed a specific event has been set up for in Mount Florida, or involving the local community in Mount Florida, because of course Mount Florida Community Council had been a bit aggrieved that in their view there had not been sufficient consultation, but Glasgow City Council has taken that on board, and I'm very pleased indeed to note that that is the case. Local dialogue is always important, and there are no shortcuts in that regard. There has also, Presiding Officer, been helpful clarification from the Scottish Government about the scope of the provisions dealing with unauthorised street trading and unauthorised advertising within the event zones, when, of course, these zones are in operation. And as we have heard, it is not the intention that there would be any impact on charity collectors or indeed on buskers. And as regards buskers, that is very welcome news indeed, because, of course, with Glasgow's great busking tradition, it is excellent that we will find a space for buskers so that they can add colour to the events for the enjoyment of all. And of course, another welcome clarification from the Scottish Government is its commitment to make an exception to the ticket touting offence for the charitable auction of tickets. An issue, however, where the committee members had most concerns, and has been referred to this afternoon, concerns that of enforcement powers. And it is the case that concerns have been expressed by, for example, the Scottish Police Federation, that the powers to be conferred on council trading standards officers are too wide and in their scope, and fail to appropriately reflect the unique role of police officers and the standards to which they are held to account. However, at the same time, the Scottish Government stressed, as did Police Scotland, that the powers concerned reflected the powers granted to trading standards officers during the essentially similar arrangements for the 2014 Commonwealth Games. Given the very serious considerations at issue, Presiding Officer, the committee in its report unanimously agreed to highlight these concerns and to call on the Scottish Government to consider whether in fact amendments will be necessary at stage 2 to allay these concerns. And I am pleased to hear from the Minister today in his opening remarks that indeed the Scottish Government will bring forward amendments at stage 2 around this issue. The Law Society, in its submission, I would declare an interest in that I'm a member of the Law Society of Scotland but not currently practising. It did make the point, which I think is an important one, that, that publicity of the legislation should be factored in because it would be essential that everybody involved, people working in the city, people making their livelihoods in the city centre and in all the event zones, were well aware of what the law is going to be as how it will impact on them. I think that's an excellent point from the Law Society, and one which I hope the Minister will duly bear in mind. Presiding Officer, we're all keen to see the European Championship matches come to Glasgow next year, and as a committee we will continue to do our job in scrutinising this bill and in the accelerated timescale that has been set. Of course, we will also seek to ensure that the reasonable concerns that have been raised are appropriately addressed. And finally, I would also wish to echo the hopes of the Tartan Army members in my constituency and the Tartan Army members in every constituency in Scotland, that in the long tradition of our national team's dramatic performances at the 11th hour, we do see Scotland succeed in the playoffs in March next year. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
I didn't see that section in the bill, but perhaps somebody's going to amend it. I call Brian Whittle, followed by Stewart McMillan.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to speak today on this bill. I think in recent years, as has been mentioned a few times, Scotland has been fortunate enough to host a number of major sporting events. Glasgow in particular has a strong international reputation for delivering on these international occasions. The 2014 Commonwealth Games brought athletes and sports fans from all around the world to Scotland and showed Glasgow and Scotland at its very best. The investment in infrastructure for that event is still paying dividends today, opening up more opportunities to attract other major events and giving local residents access to world-class facilities, which I have to say I utilise myself for the athletes that I coach. Since the Commonwealth Games, Glasgow has played host to several major sporting events, including the 2018 European Championships, along with host city Berlin, the 2019 European Athletics Indoor Championships, and later this year, the European Short Course Swimming Championships will be coming to Tollcross International Swimming Centre. There's no question that these major events come with real prestige and economic benefit for Glasgow and for Scotland more widely, and I'm delighted that Scotland will play a role in Euro 2020. It's not always acknowledged that hosting events such as the Olympics or Commonwealth Games or Euro 2020 will almost always require action in the country's Parliament. In doing so, there will always be some who question the appropriateness of passing legislation which is primarily intended to secure mainly large commercial interests. When looking at this bill and the wider issues around hosting such an event, it is a game of two halves. Apologies for that. Deputy Presiding Officer, couldn't resist it. There is a clear need to ensure that ticket touts don't rip off football fans. I was interested here. Mike Rumbles raised this with the Minister about looking at how this legislation may frame a more permanent solution to ticket touting further down the line. We need to ensure that UEFA's brand is protected and undamaged by vendors selling inferior quality or counterfeit goods, and that event sponsors have confidence that paying for advertising space is worth it, thereby, of course, reducing the need for the public to subsidise such events. Laid against that, we have to balance the legitimate rights of street traders and others who are simply going about their normal business and potentially impacting on local communities surrounding the event zones. There are concerns around whether the event zones restrictions could impinge on European Convention of Human Rights, as several people have mentioned today, and I think in particular around rights to enjoyment of property and the significant powers being handed to enforcement officers for the duration of the event. Within the detail of the bill, there does appear to be that effort being made to address these issues. I think the requirement that entering and searching private property requires owner consent, police attendance or a sheriff's warrant, for example. And I hope these issues will be given greater clarity as the bill progresses. Similarly, until Parliament and those affected by the event zone legislation know the precise extent of these event zones and their timings of operation, it's difficult to judge their potential impact. As an aside, I'd noticed that Joe Fitzpatrick was in for the earlier speeches, and I just wanted to say that the Scottish Government have shown a willingness to create zones restricting trade and trading in this case, but and specifically to Joe Fitzpatrick, it has failed to support proposals from myself to create similar restriction zones for junk food sales around about schools, and I just noting that will come back and we'll discuss that at another time. I think the relatively short timescale for implementation of the bill has raised its own issues, and many members have spoken about this as well, particularly around the ensuring proper public awareness through engagement with traders and local residents who could potentially be affected. This is a particularly important issue as it speaks to one of the most important aspects of hosting an event like this, which is public engagement. As someone who has been fortunate enough to experience a number of major international sports events up close, I recognise the huge amount of work that goes into making them happen. With that work can often come temporary disruption for people living near the event sites. Euro 2020 is a global event, but I believe it also has to be a local event for Scotland, for Glasgow, and for those communities in or near the event zones. We are asking these communities to put up with a reasonable amount of disruption, and I think it's important that UEFA, the Scottish FA and the Glasgow City Council all work to give local residents an experience they will want to remember, not one to forget. So I hope that the Minister will be able to provide some details of what work is being done to engage with all those affected by these proposal measures and the wider event. As I said at the beginning of my speech, Presiding Officer, Scotland has an impressive history and reputation when it comes to hosting international sporting events. The events themselves are often a source of inspiration to the next generation of young sportspeople, many of whom then go on to train in the same place they saw their heroes win. While many of Glasgow's most impressive sports facilities were created in the run-up to the Commonwealth Games, Hampden Park is a notable exception. It is the oldest international football stadium in the world, and while, admittedly, there are times when you go there and you can tell it's been around for a while, it hasn't lost its power to put on a show. Next year's Euros 2020 matches in Glasgow are a welcome sign of Scotland's continuing popularity as a venue for international sport, and it is a real honour and a privilege to be selected to host events like this, and it's something that we should all take great pride in. And finally, as a Parliament, it is now our responsibility to deliver a bill that ensures that the event takes place successfully, but we also have the responsibility to ensure that we make the most of the event to the benefit of the communities and businesses impacted by it. Presiding Officer.
Thank you very much. Call Stewart McMillan to be followed by James Kelly. Mr McMillan, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Presiding Officer, I support this bill and also the key aspects of Glasgow being one of the world's greatest cities for major sporting events. Euro 2020 it will build on the outstanding success of the 2014 Commonwealth Games and also the European Championships of last year. I think we have to also highlight and remember just a few of the events that have taken place in Glasgow, but also across Scotland. The UEFA Champions League final took place in 2002, Europa League final 2007, the Heineken Cup for rugby, that was Murrayfield in 2009, the Champions Cup in Murrayfield in 2017, and also the Pro 14 Grand Final at Celtic Park this year. Then there was also the Ryder Cup in 2014 and the Solheim Cup this year. Presiding Officer, it's clear that Scotland organises, hosts and delivers successful championships and sporting events. Our reputation is high, and that's something that we should really be proud of. It's hard won, but it's even more challenging to actually keep that success. Now, next year is a huge opportunity for us once again to shine and to tell the world and show the world that Scotland delivers. We've got 4 matches being played at the National Stadium in Glasgow. That's 4 occasions where Scotland, as a nation, has that opportunity to prove that once again we are a world-class location, and also 4 occasions where the festival of football comes to Scotland. The matches will be sellouts, the atmospheres will be electric, and hopefully we do get through via the Nations League playoff next spring to actually participate on the pitch as well. Now, today it was also announced that Glasgow has been named as the European Capital of Sport in 2023. This will be the 2nd time it's achieved this, after it first being the capital in 2003. This builds yet again in Glasgow, keeping its place amongst the world's sporting elite cities, by once again being ranked as the 5th best sporting city in the world at the Sport Business Ultimate Sports Cities Awards. Now, I know that what it's like to follow the men's team at a major championships, as I went to see the Scotland-Norway game at the World Cup in France in '98, many years ago. Little did I think then that that would be the last time we would participate in a major championships. But this bill plays an important role in maintaining the highest levels of delivery. As we know, Presiding Officer, the bill is relatively short. It's based on the Commonwealth Games Scotland Act, and it covers the 4 main areas that colleagues have touched upon: the ticket touting, the street trading, the advertising, and also the enforcement. Now, each of these areas are important in their own right, but it's also vital for the bill that these 4 areas are properly considered, and I believe that they have been thus far. Now, in any sporting event, one of the main causes of frustration for the legitimate sporting fans is the issue of ticket touting. Now, when I was at the World Cup in France '98, I obviously bumped into quite a number of ticket touts. And genuinely, Presiding Officer, I don't say this lightly. In my opinion, ticket touts are amongst some of the scum of the earth. They seek to profit at the expense of real sporting fans, and their greed has absolutely no limit. The only thing that's important to them is the size of their wallet or their purse. And so the way the committee actually looked at this particular issue, I thought it was really important. And the committee scrutinised the bill certainly thoroughly as a whole in the limited time available to us, and also the wide variety of recommendations in our Stage 1 report are also very much considered to be unanimous. But the issue of the ticket touting is one thing that genuinely, irrespective as to which team or if someone goes along as a neutral to one of the 4 matches, if they do encounter these people, it will annoy them. It will annoy them dearly. But also, when you get a major championships, the last thing you want to see is empty seats. And this is one of the things that, unfortunately, ticket touts, they actually lead this to happen because they charge so much money, people can't afford it, so you then price people, the real fans, out of actually attending. So I genuinely do welcome what's in the bill regarding these scum. Now, I also welcome the Minister's reply to the committee on the issue welcome the Minister's reply on the issue of ticket touting, but also the Scottish Government have been very clear from the outset that they want the bill to both be practical but also deliverable, as well as protecting the integrity of the championships. Now, I know colleagues are quite sceptical about the issue of big multinational companies, but it's just a fact of life. They sponsor events, they sponsor sporting events, and if you look at some of the events, also if we consider some of the sporting events that have taken place in Scotland, and I've already touched upon some, they wouldn't have happened without major multinational companies putting the money in to bring them to Scotland. And that's just a fact of life, whether people want to accept it or not. I welcome the Scottish Government's approach also for the issue of street trading, including the exemptions for buskers and also the charity collections. And the issue of the busking it might sound quite low level, but actually that brings the festival of the sport to the wider world. And it's something that you cannot put a value on that. An individual busker clearly will, but as a whole event, you cannot put a value on that. The advertising, I welcome the Scottish Government's response in the letter that came in yesterday, and also the issue regarding the enforcement officers and the powers. Colleagues across the Chamber have clearly raised this already, but I do welcome the Scottish Government are prepared to bring forward amendments on this particular issue. On the issue of the delegated powers, the Scottish Government response and the impact of Brexit, that's something that we do have to consider, and in the response from the Minister yesterday, I do want to highlight that it's crucial that whatever the outcome on the Brexit chaos that's going to happen, then the Scottish Government needs to act as quickly as possible to introduce the set of regulations so that the bill and that the whole event can take place in the way we all want it to take place. Clearly, Brexit will have a negative effect upon our economy, so let's do whatever we can to ensure that these championships are successful and to continue Glasgow and Scotland's reputation. And finally, Presiding Officer, I wholeheartedly agree with the comments of others regarding the consideration of a framework bill going forward. I think also the issue of engagement with the local community, and Mountford in particular, is very important to make sure that they are part of the festival of football as compared to it happening to them. And certainly make no mistake, next year will be a huge festival of football. From the sporting, the cultural, but also the economic effects will last for many, many years to come. However, the memories will never die. The memories will last forever. So I fully support the bill and also look forward to its parliamentary progress. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I call James Kelly to be followed by Richard Lyle. Mr Kelly, please.
Thank you very much, Deputy Presiding Officer. I welcome the opportunity to take part in this afternoon's debate on the bill in support of next year's European Championship matches at Hampden. I think first and foremost the thing to say is that this is a great opportunity for Glasgow and Scotland to be hosting these games next year. The way UEFA have organised the tournament is different from previous tournaments, and as Annabel Ewan pointed out, it's been organised across 12 cities, and that has given Glasgow the opportunity to host these 4 games. So first and foremost, that's a great opportunity for football fans in Scotland to see some great matches up close. I recently attended the Belgium-Scotland game at Hampden, and although the outcome was very disappointing for Scotland, losing 4-0, it was great to see the Belgium team up close, players like Kevin De Bruyne, and how good and how skillful they are. And I'm quite sure that come the championships next year, Belgium will be one of the teams that will be competing to win the overall title. So that's a great opportunity for football fans in Scotland. It's also a great advantage to the Glasgow and Scottish economy, because people will travel from outside Scotland and outside the UK, and that will boost the tourist trade, not just in Glasgow, but as Claire Baker pointed out, in cities around Scotland. And I think it also gives Scotland the opportunity to showcase ourselves as a country, and Glasgow as a city that can hold these events successfully. And we've seen that with the Commonwealth Games and also the European Championship last year. So all that said, you do need proper legislation that supports all this, because we need to ensure that the events run smoothly and efficiently, if people are able to enjoy them to the full, and we're able to showcase the benefits of our major city for future events. So from that point of view, the legislation is very much necessary, and clearly Scottish Labour support that. There have been some concerns expressed about the speed that the legislation has been put through. And I was struck listening to Joan McAlpine talking about how the committee signed off the report just last Thursday. And it was only last week that we were debating the committee's, same committee's report on the Glasgow School of Art fires. And that inquiry had taken place earlier in the year, before the summer recess. So that shows you the speed at which the committees had to work. So I think it is somewhat surprising that that the government hadn't been proactive enough to realise that, along with UEFA, that there was going to be legislation required in this. But in saying that, I think the job of everyone, government and opposition parliamentarians, is to scrutinise that legislation and make sure that it is fit for purpose. Obviously, one of the main areas is around tackling ticket touts, and I think that's very much welcome. I was interested to listen to Stewart McMillan's comments about ticket touts. I mean, I think he's right. Ticket touts are scurrilous individuals who stop at nothing, to profit from the great desire of sports fans, music fans, etc., to get to events. During the summer, I went to London with my wife and daughters, and they were attending a pop concert in Hyde Park, Stevie Wonder and Lionel Richie. I wasn't in the pop concert, I was outside, and I spent a bit of time. Yeah, they left me. Yeah, they didn't buy me a ticket. They took me down to kind of escort them to the venue and look after them. Anyway, yes. Anyway, the interesting thing was I spent a bit of time outside the venue, actually, just looking at how it all operated. It was quite interesting. But one of the things that I looked quite closely at was actually the activities of the ticket touts. And, really, the way that they hassled people who were turning up at the venue with extra tickets to sell those tickets at a reduced value. There was a lot of, quite honestly, bullying and intimidation going on. And then the way they tried to sell those tickets on at a much higher price to exploit people and exploit a profit, it really was, despicable to see that in action. So from that point of view, the government and UEFA are right to take tough action on ticket touts. And I welcome the comments others have made that this should be an opportunity to extend either current legislation or new legislation in terms of other events that are held throughout Scotland, so that we can stop people exploiting fans that are going to these events. The other issues that have been examined are around, enforcement and the use of enforcement officers. I think people are right to highlight some of the concerns of the local community around the powers of the enforcement officers, and I think the government, as well as in the legislation and the guidelines around it, have to be clear what the roles of the enforcement officers are. There's quite a lot of disruption to the local community around Hampden, and there are understandable concerns about the powers of the enforcement officers in terms of searching households around there. So I think that has to be done in a proportionate and fair manner. I'm just looking at the Deputy Presiding Officer. Do I need to wind up?
I take that means winding up.
Yeah.
Yes. You can go up to 7 minutes. I have time
Right.
in hand.
Yeah, okay. I think the other issues that are important are around proper engagement and consultation with the local communities, because I think that if that's done in a proper manner, then it will be able to address some of the concerns that have been raised and ensure that provisions that have been implemented are carried out in a way that takes the local community with them. So in summing up, Deputy Presiding Officer, it's important to get this legislation in place so that it supports the event. I think the contest itself presents a tremendous opportunity, and like others, I only hope that Scotland can be successful in the playoffs so that we can be enjoying Scotland in an international tournament for the first time since Stewart McMillan went to France in 1998. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Richard Lyle, be followed by Miles Briggs.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I begin by welcoming the opportunity to contribute to this debate on the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill? Presiding Officer, I have a confession to make. Many colleagues throughout the Chamber know that I am not a football follower. Indeed, when I ask who I support, I answer the players, because for me it is about the sport and not about teams. That's why I'm speaking in this debate today. I support the sport, I support Scotland. I recall vividly the time that I attended a football match, probably because it was my first football match which I attended. I was 12 years of age with my father. As I recall, it was a Rangers v Real Madrid game. And the memory that strikes me most is being separated from my father in a sea of people. In those days, there were very few seats, and the feeling that left me with at the time, yes, stadiums now have changed since that day. It is, of course, a far cry from the experience that many will enjoy today. In fact, football is now an opportunity to bring people together, and whilst there are the issues that are well known and discussed, there is much good in Scottish football now. Families can enjoy a match together, cheering on their favourite team, now seated in a stadium. Indeed, the recent matches with the Scottish women's team, in particular the Hampden Park game before their departure to the World Cup, were fantastic family-friendly experiences. With Glasgow now set to host the UEFA matches, I know that our venues will put on a very warm welcome. Indeed, Glasgow has become one of the world's top cities for major sporting events, and the Euro 2020 will build on the success of hosting the Commonwealth Games in 2014 and the European Championships last year. And we see the benefit. Hosting the 2014 Commonwealth Games was estimated to have added around 740 million in gross terms to the Scottish economy. And the 2007 UEFA Cup final at Hampden resulted in estimated gross expenditure of more than 16.3 million. As well as bringing thousands of people into the city and increasing trade for the shops, restaurants and hotels, these tournaments will help showcase Scotland as an outward-looking, welcoming nation. And so we are. So it's very much to be welcomed that Glasgow is one of the 12 host cities for Euro 2020, with an estimated 200,000 people expected to visit the city during the tournament. Turning to the bill, Presiding Officer, the purpose of the bill is to help ensure successful delivery of the championships by meeting the commitments required by UEFA in relation to protection of commercial rights for event sponsors during the period of the event and prohibiting ticket touting. The bill covers 4 main areas in ticket touting: street trading, advertising and enforcement. 4 new offences are being introduced, largely modelled on similar offences which were introduced during the Commonwealth Games in 2014. This action underpins the Scottish Government's determination to support fair access to tickets so that as many fans as possible can enjoy the games. And I listened to Mr Kelly, the point about ticket and people who force people to sell their tickets and then sell them on at inflated is a true reflection, sadly, what happens today, and we should try to resolve that. Therefore, it is to be welcomed that there will be a ticketing offence for selling a ticket above a face value or with a view to make a profit. This offence will be committed wherever the transaction takes place, in person or electronically. This offence will be punishable by a fine up to £5,000. There shall also be a trading offence for trading in one of the 3 event zones without appropriate authorisation. This aims to protect UEFA-approved vendors during the hours of operation of the event zones and will be punishable by a fine of up to £20,000. As well as an advertising offence for advertising in one of the 3 event zones, this aims to protect UEFA-approved sponsors during the hours of their operation. I note that during the committee stage, questions were raised during the evidence session as to whether buskers and charity collectors would be allowed to operate in the designated fan zones. The Scottish Government committed to create exemptions to allow such activities to continue during the competition, which is to be welcomed as it allows our incredibly talented individuals to continue to share their talents with visitors. Presiding officers, some may wonder why we are required to introduce legislation for this event. However, it is not unusual for the organisers of major sporting events to require host cities to introduce specific legislative protection. The last piece of major events legislation in Scotland was prepared for the 2014 Commonwealth Games, and we all know how fantastic those games were. So, to this bill today, it's not an unusual one, Presiding Officer. It's designed to ensure that the championships run smoothly in Scotland and that we deliver an excellent experience for those coming to enjoy the beautiful game. I, for one, wish the organisers all the very best of success in the coming days and hope that all visitors enjoy their time in Scotland. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
Thank you. And members will have noticed I've had a little leeway before people reach actually talking about the bill, as I appreciate it's difficult to say a lot more when other people have already said it. But don't stretch it too far. That was nearly 3 minutes before we got to the bill, Mr Lyle. Yes, thank you. I'll now call Miles Briggs to be followed by James Dornan.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And I think, like members across the chamber, when I saw we were going to be debating this bill, I can't be the only one who tried to think of an amendment to make sure that Scotland had an automatic acceptance into it. I don't know if our lawyers still have to look at that to see if that's possible, Minister, but it's something I'm sure we've all hope to achieve as well at stage 2 or 3. Glasgow, as has already been outlined, has an outstanding track record of hosting sporting events, including the European Athletics Indoor Championships and the 2019 Guinness Pro 14 final this year. And as one of the 12 cities across Europe to host the 2020 European Championship, Glasgow will be on show to the rest of Europe again, and I'm confident that the city will do a brilliant job. The UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill is being passed to meet UEFA's requirements as stated, with regards to ticket touting, preventing people from profiting at the expense of fans with a fine of up to £5,000. Now, I'm sure, as already has been outlined, demand for these tickets to games at Hampden is expected to be significantly outstrip supply, and the legislation obviously looks to stop people from bulk buying tickets in an attempt to make profits. And the 4 games being played at Glasgow will clearly have economic benefits for surrounding businesses, but primarily the event is for fans. And it's not right that fans should not be able to get a ticket at face value because someone, as has already been outlined by a number of colleagues, have made a sole aim of making money on this event. Football is not only the event where ticket touting takes place, though. For other sporting events, as well as music festivals, gigs, tickets will be bought in bulk and resold above face value in an attempt to make profit. And I hope in looking at this legislation today, I believe there's an opportunity, it presents us with an opportunity to look further into this going forward and look towards, when we have these larger scale events, how we could maybe look towards legislation either being triggered as Claire Baker outlined, to try to make sure that ticket touting can be absolutely limited. In the time I have today, I wanted to outline a number of concerns which I think has been put forward around the legislation, and Rachel Hamilton outlined this earlier. We do have concerns about the restriction of street trading to UEFA-approved vendors in the 3 event zones during the hours of operation. Now, I understand that these are a requirement of UEFA. However, I think it's important that the legislation is implemented in a sensible manner. 113 street vending licences will be impacted by the proposed Hampden Park event zone, and it's important that event organisers work closely with street traders so that this does not cause any problems. A proper information campaign will also be key so that everyone knows the impact of the new legislation on rights of traders in the area and across the city. Restriction in advertising, including traditional forms of advertising such as billboards, but also more novel approaches such as handing out free t-shirts, must also be well managed so that businesses in fan zones such as restaurants and bars will not be caught out by this new legislation. The local organising committee must be clear and must have clear conversations with local businesses about these regulations to advertising within these event zones. One of the main benefits of hosting the European Championship Games in Glasgow will be the boost it will give to local businesses and their local economy. And we must get the balance right, I believe, between the benefits of the game will bring, but also the enforcement this will bring and have the impact it will have to local businesses. In regards to exemptions in the restrictions made in the bill, we need to see, I think, further clarity and adequate consultation for these to be agreed as soon as possible, including provisions for news media, which I don't think has been discussed today, and out-of-home display advertising on transport, for example, such as in buses and taxis. There's still work to be done on this, Minister, I believe, in particular to clarify the exemptions for media outlets in game zones. And I'm pleased, though, that the reference in the bill to in the vicinity of the game zones has actually been removed, so as to remove any confusion that this could cause for advertisers and media outlets and owners. From an industry point of view, I know what has been put forward is the legislation needs to be clear and logical for businesses in Glasgow to be able to follow clearly. In terms of enforcement of the bill, as has already been outlined, I know the Scottish Police Federation still have some concerns and are calling for clarity. General Secretary Callum Steele stated if the intent of the bill is to limit commercial activities in designated areas to those vendors or sponsors approved by UEFA, it ought to be much simpler to state that the powers required to enforce that and what they are. And I share that opinion that this legislation should be absolutely straightforward. If the bill's not clear, then I think we will see confusion around commercial activities that are allowed and then any difficulties around their enforcement. As has already been mentioned, Scottish Conservatives support this bill in principle. We believe that it is crucial that we get this legislation right as it passes through Parliament, so that all 4 games can be played and enjoyed in Glasgow by fans and those travelling from further outside of Scotland and also abroad. Clarification around the hours of operation and the precise geographical limits of the event zone is welcome. An official working with Glasgow City Council in the coming months to draw up additional guidance, I think will have an important role in making sure we take forward any of these questions which have been highlighted today. To conclude, Deputy Presiding Officer, I think all of us have clearly outlined that we want to see a really successful hosting of the UEFA European Championships in Glasgow, and I believe this bill can help achieve just that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I call James Dornan to be followed by Bill Kidd. Mr Dornan is the penultimate speaker in the open debate. Mr Dornan, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Can I just say I'm delighted to be speaking in today's debate, particularly so as I have the great honour of having Hampden Park situated within my Glasgow Cathcart constituency. I was delighted to hear the Minister talk earlier on about the fact that local residents have been and will continue to be informed and updated, although I take on board some of the complaints that were raised by Rachel Hamilton and Miles Briggs just now. There was some talk about there being an issue for local traders. As Miles Briggs just said there just now, local traders tend to do quite well out of events at Hampden, and I speak to them regularly. And when Hampden was under threat, then their big concern was that those half a dozen special days that they get in the year, if they had gone, it could really impact hugely on their livelihood and the fact that they might not even stay open. But anyway, to go on to the subject of this debate, it is a major coup for Glasgow to be one of the 12 host cities, and I congratulate Glasgow City Council and all other parties involved in a successful bid. As has been said already, Glasgow will be hosting alongside other top footballing cities like London, Rome, Munich and Amsterdam. And with an estimated 200,000 people expected to visit the city during the tournament, Scotland can be showcased once more as an outward-looking, welcoming nation, boosting our local economy at the same time. With terrific venues like Celtic Park, Ibrox, Sir Chris Hoy, Velodrome and of course Hampden, Glasgow has rightfully achieved the title as one of the top 5 sporting cities in the world by consistently punching above our weight in the sporting world. And remember, we've done that without having a decent football team for decades. In fact, only today Glasgow was... Yes, of course I will.
Annabelle Ewing. I'm most grateful to the member for taking intervention. I think he probably meant to say that there has been no success in the male national team, not the female national team.
James Dornan.
A very, very good point by my colleague there, and I have to apologise profusely because some of those players play for Glasgow City who train very often within my constituency. So thank you for allowing me to put on the record the magnificent record of the Scottish women football players. Only today Glasgow was awarded European Capital of Sport for 2023, which is the first time any city has won the coveted title twice. So our congratulations is due to all involved in that particular bid too. As members may recall, last year I led a debate in Parliament on Save the Hampden Roar campaign. And despite what I know were difficult negotiations, I'm pleased that the SFA has since committed its long-term future to the stadium. Hampden's been an integral part of our day-to-day life for Scotland since its construction in 1903. And as the sports journalist Bob Brown once said, Hampden stands 4 square with Bannockburn in the Scottish psyche. Although, to be fair, unlike Bannockburn, it's had its fair share of glorious defeats to go alongside our stirring victories. During my members' debate, I recalled that my first memory of Hampden is of Celtic playing Dunfermline in the 1961, just in case anybody thought it was 1861, Scottish Cup final, first leg, attended by over 113,000 people. I was also there for Celtic versus Leeds 1970, and for Scotland against Czechoslovakia in 1973, attended by around 130 and 100,000 people respectively. It's widely accepted these spectator estimates were a bit on the low side, and over the years these incredible attendances have dropped considerably, primarily due to the requirement to become an all-seated arena. With Hampden now having a capacity of a little over 50,000, tickets for the big events are now in far greater demand. Presiding Officer, I therefore welcome the provisions of the UEFA European Champion Scotland Bill to prohibit ticket touting at the competition. Although the bill covers 4 areas, street trading, advertising and enforcement, it is on ticket touting I wish to focus the rest of my speech on today. Football is supposed to be, and once truly was, a working class game. However, many will argue against giving the sport such a title now, as ticket prices are already expensive enough. The most expensive tickets for the Euro 2020 final matches at Hampden cost £165, whilst the other 2 pricing categories are £111 and £45 each. Just to make clear, the same 3 prices will also be charged for the group stage and last 16 games at Wembley. But under this new bill, an offence will be established for selling a ticket above face value or with a view to making a profit. And this offence will be committed whether the transaction takes place in person or, which in my opinion is most important, electronically. This offence will be punished, as has been said earlier, with a fine of up to £5,000. Presiding Officer, there's an important point to mention regarding the sales process for the Euro 2020 tickets. Prior to buying the tickets, people initially applied for them during an application window. They were therefore able to apply for tickets for all games or just individual matches, and then tickets were allocated through a lottery system. However, if you were successful in this lottery, you had to take all the tickets offered to you. Many people hedged their bets, applied for several tickets for all 4 matches, and some people were successful in getting them all, leaving them with ticket bills costing hundreds or even thousands of pounds. As a result, some people sell these tickets on, potentially using secondary ticket sites. As we've heard, the problem around ticket touts is very well known. The practice of buying and reselling tickets for profits has always existed, but in the digital era, the scale of touting has increased substantially and for a variety of reasons. Professional touts look to acquire or harvest tickets in a number of ways, for instance, by the use of multiple identities or multiple credit cards. Others may use specialised software like bots to scoop up tickets the second they are made available. Then, online websites allow people to sell tickets to others, often at massively inflated prices. To give an example from today, in November, Elton John will be playing at the SSE Hydro in Glasgow for 2 nights, with the face value of tickets ranging from £51.10 to £170.25. On a well-known secondary ticketing site, individual tickets, depending on how good the seats are currently for sale between £227 to £1,358. Thankfully, at the moment, there are no football tickets on this particular site for sale for matches at Hampden, Celtic Park or Ibrox, or amazingly Firhill. However, it's absolutely staggering that this is allowed. Euro 2020 championships are for the football fan to enjoy, not for the ticket tout to make money by ripping them off. Presiding officer, as a constituency MSP for Hampden area, I sincerely hope the residents and business around Kings Park, Mount Florida continue to benefit from Glasgow's hosting of some of this tournament like they have in the past. Whether it's economically or culturally, Euro 2020 will be one of the decades-defining sporting tournaments, so it'll be exciting to be a part of it. The UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill will allow us to make sure as many people as possible can get to the 4 Euro 2020 matches at Hampden and without overpaying touts attempting to gain from reselling the tickets. Of course, while the Scottish Government are making it easier for true fans to get Euro 2020, the national side isn't guaranteed to get there itself. With automatic qualification now impossible, we're reliant on Steve Clark's side being successful in the 2020 playoffs in March next year. And just as I'm sure the whole Parliament will support Scotland's attempt to reach the tournament himself, I'm glad to hear that the whole Parliament will support the bill and today's motion. Thank you.
And the last of the open debate contributions is from Bill Kidd.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, for saving the best to last. To kick off my contribution to this debate, thank you, I would like to highlight that 2020 marks 60 years of the European Football Championships. Consequently, UEFA has spread hosting responsibility across 12 cities, and Glasgow, as we all know, has been selected as one of these. I was going to spring something on you all as letting you know that Glasgow has just been selected as European City of Sport 2023, but since other people have already mentioned it all, that's outrageous. But it just shows you that Glasgow actually really has reached that stage worldwide about being such an important centre for sport. And as the MSP for Glasgow Anniesland, I'm very delighted at the news that Glasgow is receiving this fantastic award from UEFA, and I commend UEFA for making such a fine choice, and also our Scottish Parliament Committee and the Clark's team for working to deliver a deserved success with this bill. Glasgow has a lot to offer. We're equipped with a multitude of venues that can host high volume and high quality events, whether this be music, sports or the wider arts. And Glasgow has growing cultural significance, and events like this offer an opportunity for this culture of contribution, because sport is a culture, to be shared with people from all over the world. Our delivery of the Commonwealth Games in 2014 and European Championships in 2018 evidenced this. Not only does Glasgow have a wealth of cultural assets, we have our people. In September, a survey released a global travel site, Big 7 Travel, listed Glasgow as the 5th friendliest city in Europe and 10th friendliest city in the world, and they must be going some if they're better than Glasgow. We can certainly be proud of Glasgow, largest city in Scotland, with what we have to offer and how willing we are to share this. UEFA 2020 Football Championship presents a fantastic tourism opportunity, and it is evident how beneficial this will be for our economy. Previous large-scale international events have brought in millions to the Scottish economy. The 2007 UEFA Cup final, also at Hampden, brought in over £16.3 million gross expenditure added into the local economy. And the 2014 Commonwealth Games, as mentioned by Richard Lyle, was estimated to have added £740 million in gross terms to the Scottish economy. I'm confident the selection of Glasgow as a co-host for the 2020 Football Championships will bring in money to local businesses, stimulating an economic boost for the people of Glasgow as well as the wider Scottish economy. And this, of course, is all as long as the bill we're discussing can cover all of the aspects relating to commercial activities, and as well also the sale of tickets by touts should be stamped on and stamped out. Beyond these benefits to our nation, we also want to see Scots able to go to the Games themselves and afford it.
and join in the excitement and fun that this will bring. So as we debate this legislation tied to the upcoming championship, we want to work towards ensuring that the ticketing process is in line with international best practice, and this means protecting customers from the inflated prices of ticket touting through the provisions in the bill. I'm sure this can be achieved. Research shows that 90% of tickets on resale platforms are listed by traders rather than individuals who have genuine need to resale. Traders, as they are called, are identified as those who sell more than 100 tickets per year, and the Fanfare Alliance explains that touts look to acquire or harvest tickets by a variety of means, for instance by use of multiple identities or multiple credit cards. Others may use specialised software to scoop up tickets the instant they're made available, and these are then listed and sold for excess profits on secondary ticketing websites. It's clear that prohibiting ticket touting online and outside events will give our constituents and others, visitors, a fair opportunity to buy tickets and be able to participate in this international event, and this change to our legislation is appropriate. It will bring the process of ticket buying, something which is integral to events, to a higher standard consequently, and this process will then be in line with our country's level of excellence as a host and vendor of international events. Following on from the Commonwealth Games and last year's European Championships in all sports, the UEFA European Football Championships of 2020 will continue to build our profile as a country proficient and successful in hosting international events. Thank you.
We move now to the closing speeches, and I call Claire Baker.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. This has been an interesting debate this afternoon, and although there has been criticism of the timescale we've faced with this debate, we have had the opportunity to give the issues a good hearing. Members have identified the key issues raised, and I will consider where we have reached consensus on these in closing. But we should not lose sight of the excitement, the anticipation and the drama that Glasgow's involvement in this special tournament will bring. This bill is necessary for our successful involvement in the tournament, and once we have these measures in place, we can focus on the preparations and the possibilities the tournament brings. The Law Society provide a good description of what we are seeking to achieve with the legislation. They say that it is important that the measures in the bill are commensurate, transparent and appropriate. As members recognise, as a requirement of UEFA, there will be an impact on street traders whose regular business, enabled by having a licence to trade, will be affected over the time of the tournament, as UEFA are strict about the need to protect their sponsors. This will have an impact on these traders' income, and the Government might want to say more about what they anticipate the impact to be. Rachel Hamilton did talk about measures announced by Glasgow City Council, and perhaps the Minister can say more about this in closing. Members raised a number of issues around the boundary, and clarity over the boundary would be welcome as soon as possible. As Annabel Ewing highlighted, the impact on street traders and the Law Society's comments on the need for awareness raising once we know what the boundary of the event zone will be. Enforcement powers has been a key issue that the committee has raised, and as the Minister highlighted, the relationship between the police and the enforcement officers has been supported by Police Scotland, who gave the committee some assurances around this. Police Scotland said that they were confident that there is nothing outlined in the provisions of the proposed bill that would negatively impact upon that positive working relationship, and provided assurances of the ability of police officers and enforcement officers to work together. However, having said that, a number of members did raise concerns over enforcement officers, and I think Ros Greer described the powers, concerns that the powers were too broad and invasive. So there is a need for clarity to be put into the bill. There is a need to make the intention evident in terms of who can be an enforcement officer, and the Minister's comments around local authority employees is welcome this afternoon. And also a need to clarify the boundaries on the use of other people who may be reasonably required. Now, Mike Rumble spoke about the interpretation of notifying the police, which was a committee recommendation. And looking at it again, I do accept there's a need for the committee to be clearer there, but it would be helpful for the Minister to respond to the comments that Mike Rumble gave in his closing. And also if the Minister can maybe reflect on the tension that appears to be between the role of the enforcement officer and the police officer. And as I understand it, the enforcement officer's responsibilities are very similar to trading standards officers' responsibilities. But appears to be, we had evidence from Callum Steele from the Scottish Federation, there appears to be like an ongoing debate about where is the appropriate balance of powers between police officers and trading standards officers, and whether the Minister could reflect on that. Is it part of a broader debate, or is it specific to this bill? Ross Greer also highlighted the issue of legacy and the debate around how we sustain the interest that major events or sporting success generates. And as he said, there's been a level of disappointment around how much the Commonwealth Games was able to cascade through to communities and give that kind of longer lasting benefit. So I think it's an issue we need to consider. Brian Whittle focused on public engagement and highlighted that while the scrutiny time that we have is short, so is the implementation period as we lead up to the tournament. And so there is a lot of work for everybody to do. Presiding Officer, as Stewart McMillan highlighted, the bill is similar to elements of the Commonwealth Games legislation that was passed in 2008. That was a more extensive piece of legislation, and although the committee that dealt with that had less time, they took less evidence and they concentrated on ministers. Sorry, I should have said, although they had more time, they took less evidence and they concentrated on ministers and officials. This might have been due to a warmer attitude towards the Commonwealth Games than that which is sometimes enjoyed by UEFA. But this timescale has been challenging for this committee as issues were raised in the requests for responses, and it was important for us to then take an opportunity to scrutinise these. James Kelly and Stewart McMillan talked about ticket touts and how prevalent they are at big venues and events as well as online. Ticket touting across all sectors has been difficult to tackle. The resale of football tickets has been banned since 1994, but it's not legal to resale a music ticket for profit. And the Minister might want to clarify why the 1994 legislation doesn't apply to this event. The introduction of a voluntary code of conduct did change the behaviour of Ticketmaster, and it did raise standards across the industry. The Competition and Markets Authority have been important in enforcing existing legislation and agreed legal undertakings with StubHub and Ticketmaster last year, but were forced to serve Viagogo with a court order. In checking some of the facts for today's debate, I put UEFA Euro 2020 into the search engine. Imagine my horror when the first link that comes up is Europe 2020 tickets were on sale on the Viagogo site. It was only when I clicked on it, it became clear it was tickets for the soft rock group, Europe, who are touring with Whitesnake and Foreigner. However, the moral of the story is, when I did the search, the first link to come up wasn't about football, it wasn't about the tour, it was Viagogo, and they're trying to sell secondary tickets. So this legislation and the enforcement of existing legislation must be robust enough to prevent ticket touting taking place during this tournament. Just a couple of other comments. It is welcome that we've had confirmation around there will be the ability to auction tickets for charity, and a number of members did raise the importance of achieving balance. They raised the concerns of residents in and around the event zones, and Miles Brigg also highlighted the restrictions on businesses and calls for the regulations to be clear and businesses being supported to comply. This is an important stage in legislation, Presiding Officer, and I look forward to the amendments expected from the Minister. The issues raised by MSPs this afternoon need to be addressed, and I think we all want to see a positive experience for the tournament in Glasgow for all those who will be involved.
Call Alexander Stewart.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I am very pleased to be able to close this afternoon on behalf of the Scottish Conservatives in this debate on the Culture, Tourism and External Affairs Committee's debate on UEFA's European Championships Bill. And as a member of the committee, I'm delighted at the contributions that we've received today from members across the chamber and the consensus that has taken place. Having Scotland hosting matches at Hampden Park during the 2020 European Championships is a fantastic news for Glasgow and for Scotland. We recognise the importance of Euro 2020 in terms of the economic benefits that it will bring and the tournament will bring to the communities around the stadium. However, the bill, as it works, wants to address areas of Scottish law which do not meet UEFA standards of protecting sponsors' commercial interests. The Scottish Conservatives support the bill in principle, but we will seek clarification around event zones requirements and the ongoing concerns of the European Convention on Human Rights. These human rights concerns circle and are they around the restrictions on street trading and advertising that could inhibit business. We want to ensure that business is not inhibited, presiding officer, while powers granted to enforcement officers to enable a search provide properties. That needs to be looked at, and we've discussed that already today in some length about the restrictions and the enforcement officers. The possibility that businesses will piecemeal enjoyment of their properties will of course be limited to the timescales that happen during the zones and during the time that it takes when this tournament will take place. Whilst the bill proposes safeguards in relation to enforcement officers exercising their powers to enter and search private property, this, of course, occurs and will only occur if the enforcement officer is accompanied by the police officer or a warrant has already been issued by a sheriff. Presiding officer, the Culture, Tourism and External Affairs Committee gave their backing to the UEFA Championships last week. We looked at and we continue to take evidence and briefings across a number of organisations, and I pay tribute to these organisations and individuals who came and gave us of their time to talk about the concerns that they have. In summary, there are a range of provisions which the UEFA Championship Bill seeks to introduce, including ticket touting and street trading and designing fan zones. And questions were raised during the committee's evidence about the whole idea of ensuring that buskers and charitable collections would be allowed to operate during in these designated fan zones. And I'm delighted that the Scottish Government did look upon this and have given exceptions to ensure that such activities will be allowed during the competition. And to reiterate, Deputy Presiding Officer, the bill consists of the following 5 components: to prohibit the unauthorised sale of championship tickets in excess of face value with a view to making a profit, prohibiting unauthorised street trading within the zones of Glasgow while the zones are operating, prohibiting authorisation of advertising within these zones, creating criminal offences for ticket touting, unauthorised street trading and advertising, and providing the distinction of enforcement officers and the powers that they have. Now, we've had quite a lot of good contributions across the chamber this afternoon, Presiding Officer, and I'd like to pull on many of those. But many people talked about engagement and the opportunity that that engagement brought, and to ensure that this priority is being dealt with during this entire process. The Minister himself spoke about the track record that Scotland has and talked about the zones, and we on the committee were delighted to receive some maps that gave us an idea of where these zones were going to take place. And we're also happy to hear that the government is listening, and the government will bring in some amendments in the next stages to ensure going forward. Our convener, Joe McAlpine, talked about the briefing note that we'd received from the Law Society, giving some of its recommendations. And these recommendations must be listened to and acted upon, because they gave us some real clear clarity. Rachel Hamilton, my colleague, talked about the consultation that's taken place with the residents and the business community. That is key to ensuring the success. And we want to see a safe and a secured, successful event on match days and also in the run-up to the days. And that is vitally important. Ross Greer touched on this rushed timescale. Now, many of us on the committee had some anxiety, Presiding Officer, about the rushed timescale, and that has been highlighted. And it's good that that has been given, because it's proper that scrutiny and governance is taken into this whole process, and these points were well made. Mike Rumbles talked about the powers that are being given to enforcement officers, and there was some dubiety about the role and responsibility of all of that, and I think it's important that we look at that. The bill itself is good legislation, and it is going to give us an opportunity. Brian Whittle talked about Glasgow's record at hosting international events, and that having events of this nature do bring forward the opportunity for legislation to take place. And he spoke about the enforcement and the timescales. These are all vitally important. So in conclusion, Presiding Officer, we in the Scottish Conservatives do support the bill in principle, but we will seek clarity around the hours of operation and the precise geographical limits for the proposed event zones from the government. And I'm sure that the Minister will give us some clarity in his summing up. Like the Commonwealth Games, which show hosted in Glasgow in 2014, this is an outstanding opportunity for Scotland. Our national stadium will take centre stage but we must ensure that lessons are learned from the Games, and we will be seeking clarity for the future stages of the bill as it progresses through Parliament. We welcome the opportunity this brings, again, to put Scotland on the map, and the possibilities and the opportunities it will bring for Glasgow, Scotland and our country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Stewart. And now I call on the Minister, Ben Macpherson, to wind up and conclude our debate.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I would like to, first of all, thank all members for their contributions this afternoon. And indeed, as others have said, for all the evidence received from organisations from different perspectives in the analysis of this legislation. I'm also really glad that clearly there is widespread support across the Chamber for the general principles underpinning the bill, and for Glasgow taking its place on the world stage alongside the 11 other host cities that Annabel Ewing helpfully listed as part of the UEFA European Championships 60th anniversary. I will certainly take away and consider all the points of constructive feedback which have been raised today, and as I said in my opening remarks, we'll seek to address those issues when I come to the Culture, Tourism, Europe and External Affairs Committee at stage 2. And we'll look to do so in a spirit of collaboration and cooperation. As we are all aware, official sponsors provide a vital source of funding for the Championship, as Stewart McMillan mentioned, without which it would not take place and might require additional public investment. And the bill not only helps to protect the investment of sponsors by preventing ambush marketing, but will also ensure a welcoming environment for spectators, protect the character of the event and help to ensure safe access to event zones. Crucially, and others have focused on this in today's debate, it will criminalise ticket touting for profit. And this will in turn support the official sale of tickets and ensure fair access to matches for football fans, as James Dornan highlighted. We are seeking to strike the right balance in providing reassurance to UEFA that commercial rights have been protected in key areas, while minimising the impact on local businesses and allowing them to benefit from the economic opportunity that the Euro 2020 represents. With 200,000 visitors expected in Glasgow during the Championship and Scotland more widely, this will increase trade for local hotels, but also, importantly, shops and restaurants in and around the event zones. And we believe that the Championship as a whole presents a significant economic opportunity for Scotland and for Glasgow in particular. In the time I have remaining, I would like to just come on to some of the points that members have raised. I think, and first of all, I'd like to thank all parties for expressing their support for the principles of the bill. Firstly, I think Mike Rumble's made an important point that while we base this legislation on the 2008 Act, we should seek to make this legislation as good as possible. And I share that sentiment. And in doing that, first of all, before we brought the bill, before we introduced the bill, an additional section, Section 9, was added regarding street traders, that Glasgow City Council must offer alternative trading arrangements to existing street traders during the times when the trading offence applies. That was considering issues around the ECHR, but also to make sure that those street traders who will be disrupted have some economic benefit. And I'm grateful for the Conservative members, James Dornan and Annabel Ewing, for raising that point. There was also points raised during the debate around the zones and engagement. I spoke about the engagement that we've already undertaken previously, and Glasgow City Council has as well, but I would also like to just note to Parliament that we will be having meetings with Mount Florida Community Council this week on the 7th of November, and there's a meeting planned on the 14th of November with Hampden residents, with the Scottish FA, Glasgow Life and other stakeholders. And that engagement will continue to make sure that businesses are clear on what the legislation will entail, and to also do that with the Community Council, and I look forward to clarifying some points with them. Much of the points they raised, and also was raised in the debate, surrounded ECHR and also the enforcement. And quite rightly, in my view, there's been a strong focus here on civil liberties and how we get that balance right. I would just like to point out that during the consideration of drafting the bill in the first instance, Articles 5, 6 and 8 in relation to the enforcement of offences were considered during the drafting of the bill and to be compliant. And actually sections 20 and 21 are there to protect the ECHR. With regard to enforcement, and particularly the committee, and both Ross Greer and Mike Rumbles focused on this in terms of section 19, the power to enter and search, and as did the SPF in their written evidence and oral evidence at committee. I would just like to draw members' attention to the second bullet point in my response to the committee report, where I say we'll look to clarify that the power to enter and search a place without a warrant in section 19 can only apply where permission to enter and search is given by a person who is able to grant that permission in relation to the property by explicitly stating this on the face of the bill. So I will look to do that at stage 2, and I hope that by doing that, some of the concerns that have been raised will start to fall away. A brief intervention, yeah.
Ross Greer.
Thank you very much. I very much welcome the Minister's commitment to make appropriate amendments at that point. The concerns that were raised were not just around the moment where an enforcement officer might decide that entry and search is warranted, but also the accountability of that. For a police officer to make that decision, there's then a clear accountability mechanism that police officer is held to. There's a concern that there is not an appropriate and equivalent accountability mechanism for when enforcement officers are making decisions based on their own personal judgment.
Minister. I'll come on to that point within the wider considerations of enforcement. Just thank you, Mr. Greer. Of course, use of force is encapsulated in section 20, which requires a sheriff to grant a warrant, and the officer is accompanied by a constable. So there's robust protections there, and particularly no points were raised by Conservative speakers around residential property. And also the Community Council had raised this in their evidence. I just want to underline the fact that it's 21 rather, that an enforcement officer may only take action under 17 and 19 in relation to a house or a place that can be entered only through a house if an individual who habitually resides in the house permits the enforcement officer to do so, or the sheriff grants a warrant for such action. An enforcement officer may only enter a house at reasonable times and if accompanied by a constable. So there's already robust safeguards in terms of residential property within section 21. I think the point around police powers and the committee's suggestion, I think it's important to emphasise that Police Scotland has indicated to us that details of any expert assistance with regard to enforcement officers would be relayed to the Multi-Agency Coordination Centre and noted on the incident via existing channels. So there will already be a record of existing when external assistance is used by the enforcement officers. But the issue remains that insisting that the police are notified in advance of taking action could create delay or confusion. So we will continue to consider that point that the committee has raised. Obviously, I referred to it in my written response to the committee, and also made a commitment that the current test of reasonableness for bringing someone with you be increased to necessity. Do I have time? Yeah. Okay. Briefly. Yeah.
Mr. Rumbles.
I do thank the Minister for taking the intervention on that point. We too do not want to delay any action that the enforcement officers may take, but it was an important point discussed in the debate in the committee that for these powers, for another person to be involved, a police officer must either oversee it or agree that it's not a problem. You've already just said that it goes to the communication centre anyway, but it doesn't say that on the bill, or indeed regulations. Could you put that in the regulations as they come forward?
Could members please keep the background chat down?
Thank Minister. Thank Mike Rumbles for that intervention. We'll consider points as we go into stage 2, but I think there's a practical consideration around police officers on the ground and allocation of resources, but we'll continue to consider that because of the accountability points that have been raised, and we look forward to engagement on that as we progress towards stage 2, Parliament permitting. With regard to ticket touting, take Mike Rumble's point with regard to section 2.4. We will consider that into stage 2. I think we need to be absolutely clear that we don't create a loophole that could be exploited by ticket touts, but we will analyse that. Also, thanks to the points about advertising, Miles Briggs raised an important point around that in terms of how the exemptions with regard to transport, for example, and just in terms of the draft regulations that we've already provided, advertisement on or in moving vehicles, for example, buses, vans or trucks, this exemption will be exempt, but there won't be an exemption, as you would expect, for vehicles used primarily to display adverts, such as mobile advertising boards. I hope that clears your point, but if it doesn't, feel free to be in touch. There's been some wide discussion around a framework bill. I think that's, as I've said, we will undertake to formally review this legislation should it pass, and then we are successful in delivering the tournament. And I think we've all got an ambition as a Parliament to see what we can do going forward to create an environment where if it's possible within devolved powers, where we can continue to tackle ticket touting, but also have a more strategic rather than a piecemeal approach. So I look forward to engaging on those points in the future, but also to how we think about the success of this legislation, Parliament permitting. So in closing, I would just like to thank members again for their contributions from the committee and also from the Parliament as a whole. Reasonable concerns have been raised and these will be considered. And also want to take this opportunity to underline that I'm very happy to meet with individual members on a one-to-one basis if they wish to discuss any matters in further detail, and will commit to engage early as Ross Greer requested. And I say to demonstrate that I'm open to further conversations as we go into stage 2. There will undoubtedly be areas on which we disagree, but I am certain that we can reach consensus on many of the issues raised, produce a piece of legislation that is not only fit for purpose, but allows us to once again deliver a gold standard major event here in Scotland. And I move that Parliament supports the principles of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that concludes the Stage 1 debate on the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill. We're going to move on to the next item of business, which is the election of a member for appointment to the Scottish Parliamentary Corporate Body. And I have received one valid nomination for appointment. The nomination is David Stewart. So the question is that David Stewart be selected for appointment to the Scottish Parliamentary Corporate Body. And this we need to move to a formal division. So members should press their yes, no or abstain buttons now. Thank you. The result of the vote is yes 90. There were no votes against. There were no abstentions. The motion is agreed, and as a majority of members have voted in favour, David Stewart is duly selected for appointment to the SPCB, and I congratulate David Stewart on his appointment. We're going to turn now to decision time. There's only one question today. The question is that motion 19701 in the name of Ben Macpherson on the UEFA European Championship Scotland Bill be agreed. Are we all agreed? Yes. We are agreed, and that concludes decision time. We're going to move shortly to members' business. In the name of Ross Greer on Save Loch Lomond. We'll just take a few moments for the Minister and other members to change seats. A few moments.
Thank you. The final item of business is a members' business debate on motion 19581 in the name of Ross Greer on Save Loch Lomond. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. Can I ask those members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now? And I call on Ross Greer to open the debate. Mr Greer, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I'd like to thank members from across the Parliament for supporting my motion and helping secure this debate today. This planning application has attracted more discussion and interest than any other local issue in the west of Scotland in the 3 years that I've been an MSP. It's clear to me that it's so deeply emotive to people because of the importance of Loch Lomond to Scotland and because Balloch is the gateway to Loch Lomond for so many of us. Back in September 2016, Scottish Enterprise announced that they'd struck an exclusivity agreement with Flamingo Land, giving them first refusal to purchase the sections of the site which they own. Flamingo Land's Chief Executive, Gordon Gibb, told the press at the time that he was excited by the prospect of creating a resort in the National Park that recognises the importance and sensitivity of the site. But as his plans emerged, it became increasingly clear that the importance and sensitivity of the site was not being recognised. It was being seriously undermined. 125 woodland lodges were to be squeezed in, with most of them in the protected ancient woodland at Drumkinnon Woods. Iconic views were to be interrupted by a water park and a hotel on the shoreline. Space used freely for leisure by locals and visitors alike would become part of a branded gated development, meaning that non-paying visitors would become second-class citizens behind those who could afford the premium to rent a lodge. The majority of the site would be handed over from public ownership under the control of Scottish Enterprise to the ownership of a private company based hundreds of miles away. For many, it was the details in the developer's own environmental impact assessment that drove home just how unacceptable the plans were. The assessment warned of damage to ancient woodland, pollution of standing and running water, red squirrel and otter fatalities, and a host of other environmental concerns. While Flamingo Land initially promised 300 new jobs for the area, this number plummeted as time went on. The eventual impact assessment stated the equivalent of just 28 net jobs would be created in the region in comparison to Flamingo Land did not go ahead. Many of the promised jobs were seasonal, and the developers seemed to drop their initial promise to rule out use of zero-hours contracts. Add to that the list of concerns over a range of issues, such as the preservation of the listed Woodbank House and uncertainty over the riverside leased by boat clubs on the west bank of the Leven, and it becomes clear why this drew massive and unprecedented opposition. We lodged over 57,000 objections, making Flamingo Land the most unpopular planning application in Scottish history. I'd like to thank every one of them for making their views known. I'd also like to thank organisations including the Woodland Trust and Rambourg Scotland for their opposition to the plans, and Western Bartonshire Council, who unanimously backed a motion from Council Leader Jonathan McCall calling on the National Park to refuse. I'd particularly like to applaud those in the local community who led this campaign so well, especially Sam, Alana, Rory and the Save Loch Lomond team represented in the public gallery tonight. This was a campaign ran in the face of hostility and bullying behaviour from the developer. At least 3 local elected representatives, including myself, were threatened with defamation. In response to that threat, I pointed out that I was reading from Flamingo Land's own impact assessment, so best of luck to them taking an action based on their own documents. Their lawyer has made particularly patronising remarks about Jackie Bailey, who I'm sure will share her thoughts on Flamingo Land's conduct later this evening. Flamingo Land's Chief Executive, Gordon Gibbs, said at the start they would withdraw if they did not have the public's support. When it became clear that this wasn't the case, I wrote to him reminding him of what he said. His response was nothing short of a tantrum in written form, so let me quote a few highlights. "I won't be lectured by a very inexperienced politician." And "Now I come to think of it, Ross, how can you advise anyone of anything that is important in the adult world?" That gives you an idea of the tone of the rest of the letter. Does that sound like someone we want owning such an important part of our world-famous national park? When we started this campaign a few years ago, I don't think even we thought success was likely. But success is exactly what we have achieved. First, the National Parks officers recommended rejection of the plans, and then just a week before the public hearing, Flamingo Land and Scottish Enterprise withdrew their application. All I can say to Gordon Gibb, who I know will be watching, is that this inexperienced politician and the community campaign that I stand with have beaten you at every turn so far. So why don't you just cut your losses and jog on? Flamingo Land are unfortunately considering whether to resubmit their application. We've won everything so far, but the battle to save Loch Lomond is not over. The exclusivity agreement is in place for another year, and that means it's Flamingo Land and not the community still in control. When the application was withdrawn, I launched a campaign asking Scottish Enterprise to cancel the agreement and allow the community the opportunity to take on the land and decide its future. We're still unclear on the nature of the exclusivity agreement and the potential for it to be terminated, though, so I'd welcome clarification from the Minister on that point if possible. Local residents did come together at a meeting 2 weeks ago to consider what Balloch and the wider area needs. The list of ideas suggested by residents included a municipal water sports centre, camping and motorhome facilities, a backpacker hostel, a forest school, heritage centre, a museum and much more. There was significant interest in developments around ecotourism, which is growing year on year. Affordability, educational benefit and recognising Balloch as an accessible base for exploring both sides of the loch were also identified as priorities. The need for significant improvements in public transport across the loch was certainly identified. A truly coordinated and easily accessible public transport and active travel plan is needed for all of Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park. Now that the imminent threat has been lifted, that travel strategy will be one of my top priorities, and I'd welcome interest from the Government in a coordinated approach with the National Park and local councils in developing it. Residents are clear that they don't want a scar on the protected woodland, the riverbank and the loch shore. They don't want 125 lodges providing holidays that many would struggle to afford, attracting thousands more cars and sending profits to a corporation based far from the area. Flamingo Land have repeatedly told locals, often in a patronising manner, that there is no alternative, that their plan is the only way to prevent misery and unemployment in the Vale of Leven, that it's their resort or Balloch will forever be a neglected, derelict wasteland. But the community have other ideas, dozens of them. These alternative proposals could provide sustainable and quality jobs, educational benefits and far more, while preserving the stunning natural beauty which makes Loch Lomond a global destination. In contrast, Flamingo Land and Scottish Enterprise's plan was frankly boring, generic and expensive. It doesn't enhance Balloch's position as a gateway to the national park. It's not what we need to support the economy and certainly not to tackle the climate emergency. It raises the question of what exactly Scottish Enterprise think they are for, and I would appreciate the Minister's views on this. Scottish Enterprise, as a government agency, seem that their only interest is to be getting shot of this land as quickly as possible, while being able to add a few more job figures to their annual report. No real consideration was being given to the local community or the environment. Surely their considerations should not be so narrow. The idea of a community buyout to progress some of the ideas that we have been exploring in the local community is drawing wide support. But what's happening at Balloch isn't isolated. I've been notified of a similar application at Tarbert, and just outside the National Park, I recently visited Port and Cable, where residents showed me the impact a wildly out-of-scale proposed development would have on their small community. Whether it's rural or urban communities, in or outside national park boundaries, these aggressive applications raise fundamental questions of who owns Scotland, who is our land for, and what collective rights do we have to decide its future. Exploring those questions would fill weeks of debate. For now, I'll close by once again thanking members, thanking the local community, and renewing my commitment to stand with them and save Loch Lomond.
Thank you, Mr Greer. I call Jackie Bailey to be followed by Rona Mackay.
Presiding Officer, let me congratulate Ross Greer on securing time for this debate, and I was pleased to contribute to the cross-party support so we could discuss this important local issue in my constituency. Can I also too welcome members of Save Loch Lomond to the Parliament this evening. Let me say at the outset, Presiding Officer, I am not opposed to development in general, but it is fair to say that any development needs to be considered in context. And this proposal, brought forward by Iconic Leisure, now renamed as Lomond Banks, more commonly known as Flamingo Land, was for development at the Balloch end of the National Park. As an aside, Presiding Officer, if you need to change your name 3 times in the course of one application, then your PR isn't going terribly well. Ross Greer is right to mention maturity. I hesitate to do so. But Flamingo Land's letters are not designed to win friends and influence people. They indeed are the ones that lack maturity in this debate. And I have to say, presiding officer, I have been insulted by far better people than them. Firstly, there is, of course, the question of who owns the land. In this case, it is Scottish Enterprise, and by extension, it is Scottish ministers. It is the Scottish Government. Now, I very much welcome Marie Goujon responding in the Chamber tonight, but this actually is of direct interest to Derek Mackay, so I hope she will forgive me if I ask her to convey these messages in the strongest possible terms to him. Because the land was purchased some 20 years ago at a cost of over £2 million. Now, you might have expected it to appreciate in value, but it's now valued at £200,000. The truth is, whatever sum of money eventually changes hands, if it does, I'm clear that Scottish Enterprise has already spent at least £200,000 in commissioning reports and plans to assist Flamingo Land because, of course, they are partners with them in this venture. And I am in no doubt, presiding officer, that Flamingo Land will benefit from grants and loans from Scottish Enterprise as well. This is all public money. So in effect, we are paying for them to come to Scotland. Now, it does strike me as faintly ridiculous that the public are paying for something that the majority of the public don't actually really want. Now, let me set aside planning, environmental and infrastructure considerations for a moment. I have in my submission talked about the impact on ancient woodland, the lack of capacity on the A82 and other things besides. Rather, I want to focus exclusively on economic benefit and the role of Scottish Enterprise in all of this. It is the job of Scottish Enterprise to seek out economic opportunities. I expect them, though, to be good quality opportunities rather than just any old thing will do. The site to be developed, in my view, is of strategic importance to the national park and to tourism, so careful thought needs to be given to any development. So how many jobs will be generated? In this case, the numbers went from 300 to 200, with half being seasonal and most likely to be lower paid. Will the employer guarantee to pay the Scottish living wage? Well, it took a little time before Flamingo Land understood that we didn't mean David Cameron's so-called living wage, which is just the national minimum wage renamed. They took a while to understand what we meant by that. But what about the economic impact of all these additional visitors? Well, you know, the interesting thing is, Flamingo Land's business model is predicated on keeping people within their development, spending their money there and not in the wider community. So businesses in our local area are unlikely to benefit. Look, even Scottish Enterprise, account-managed companies in the area, in direct competition to Flamingo Land, were not told at all about the development. Now, is that any way for our National Enterprise Agency to behave? So is this sufficient economic bang for our buck? Well, I think the answer is no. Now, Scottish Enterprise has extended their exclusivity agreement with Flamingo Land. There are conditions attached to it, but frankly, it's a state secret. So we don't know what the conditions are because they won't tell us. We don't know if they've been breached because they won't tell us. And this simply is not transparent. And I hope the Minister tonight will give a commitment to publish those conditions in the exclusivity agreement. Because, you know, presiding officer, there is a different way of doing this. Scottish Enterprise could engage in a community buyout. It's Scottish Government policy, after all, to encourage community buyouts. I think that is a better way of securing long-term sustainability and a better tourism offer for the National Park and for Balloch. So I would urge the Scottish Government to get a grip of this project, to end the absurdity of public money being used to pay Flamingo Land to come and take the land from us, which no one appears to want. After all, the community is prepared to do it for free, and that surely is a better return for our money. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Rona Mackay to be followed by Maurice Corrie. Ms Mackay, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I thank Ross Greer for raising this very important issue in the Chamber, as it's one that hits particularly close to home for me, quite literally. Being just a 30-minute drive from my constituency of Strathkelvin and Bearsden, Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park has been a jewel in Scotland's beautiful countryside for generations of families, including my own. Whether it be a family day out, walks with the dogs along the shoreline, or indeed a trip simply to embrace and observe the beautiful surroundings and nature that many of us are so lucky to have on our doorstep, it's safe to say that Loch Lomond is revered and treasured and, crucially, must be protected. That's why I was shocked to see these proposals to essentially commercialise and privatise a large chunk of one of our nation's greatest landmarks. So I'd like to commend Ross Greer for his work to oppose this, for getting an incredible number of signatories to his petition, 57,000 within 2 months, and thank the National Park Planning Officers and Western Bartonshire Council, among others, for their recommendation to refuse permission. Now, I understand that it's often the case that large-scale developments are met with initial backlash. However, the objections of 57,000 people can't be ignored and serve as a testament to the fact that there's no appetite for these proposals. I believe this sentiment is shared by the majority of people who have been able to experience the wonder of Loch Lomond. Presiding officer, like Jackie Baillie, I'm not someone who believes that Scotland should be preserved in aspic and no development should ever take place. I want people to come to Scotland and enjoy our wonderful lochs and tourist attractions with tasteful facilities that we've all come to expect. But there's no world where hotels, restaurants and craft breweries serve as an adequate substitute for Scottish nature, wildlife and history. Furthermore, it's my understanding, and Ross Greer has confirmed this, that Flamingo Land's own environmental impact assessment states that there will be damage to ancient woodland, pollution of standing and running water, red squirrel and otter fatalities and more. Is all that worth sacrificing for more tourist pounds? Surely the natural attraction of the area is worth far more than a roller coaster or two. Presiding officer, it's imperative that this treasured public space remains just that. Public space that's to be used and enjoyed for families for generations to come, as it's been enjoyed by the many generations before it. Loch Lomond is one of Scotland's greatest landmarks, and maintaining its integrity must be of paramount importance, and a community buyout which would allow that seems eminently sensible to me. Furthermore, our environmental heritage should not be sullied by big business intent on making a profit, and I echo the points made by Ross Greer and Jackie Baillie regarding Scottish enterprise and ownership. Rejecting these proposals and further proposals sends a clear message to developers. Leave our bonny banks alone and let nature be the attraction.
Thank you very much. I call Maurice Corrie to be followed by Mark Ruskell. Mr Ruskell is the last speaker in the open debate. Mr Corrie, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. I would like to pass my thanks too to Ross Greer tonight for putting forward this very timely members to business debate. It is indeed a privilege to represent the expansive West of Scotland region, as I do, where much of its natural beauty can be found in the Loch Lomond and Trossachs National Park, boasting the attractions of wildlife and scenic views. And I personally, who was born and brought up in Helensburgh in the Loch Lomond area, have enjoyed it many times, whether it be climbing Ben Lomond, whether it be swimming in the loch, along with the swimming adders. As you probably know, it's the only place in the world where we have swimming adders down by Arden, and also skating on as well at Ban Mahar on a couple of years that they had very, very heavy frost. So I do know it very well. And also beside it, we have the most wonderful Balloch Park, which I don't know many of you know, but do take a walk through it. It is fantastic. And I think we should be looking at things there as well. But any proposal, as I say, based within such an area should understandably be examined carefully and consider the views of the surrounding community. And I've said this before in this House. Without a foundation of support, it cannot progress. And that is what we have seen in the case of Lomond Bank's proposal. And clearly, its proposals were met with strong concern, both from within the local area and wider Scotland. We have already heard details of the tourism plans this evening from Ross Greer, and features including a treetop walk, a monorail, a craft brewery, leisure centre, a part hotel and restaurants, amongst others. A planning application such as this, jointly put forward by Lomond Banks and Scottish Enterprise, needs to address and reflect the concerns of the local residents, and this can be no stronger said than in the 57,000 signatories that were done on the petition. And promises contained within Lomond Bank's proposal spoke of protecting wildlife, but suggestions of building a monorail and a hotel seem to suggest otherwise. It was also indicated that such a development would create employment opportunities for locals, and of course job openings are a positive factor, but not enough just to justify such a controversial development. And assurances of a long-lasting reliability of work for local residents is really needed, not just part-time or seasonal. Of course, it would be unrealistic to not recognise the benefits tourism can bring to an area. When done well, and above all considerately, the tourism can be used to promote the natural beauty of the area and channel much needed resources into the community. Opening doors to international visitors can effectively put their area and wider Scotland on the map. And indeed, when the planning was done at Lomond Shores, they identified an area of a drive time of 1.5 hours from Loch Lomond to capture the weekend local, we'll call it local and national tourism. And of course, when you look at the statistics at that time, they were forecasting 9 million visitors passing or coming in to the Loch Lomond Shores area. So that gives you an idea of the quantity of what we're dealing with at the moment. And what worries me is that Western Bartonshire should be carrying out an infrastructure review. And not only that, so should Transport Scotland at the government level, because it seriously needs to be looked at, not just the local area of Balloch, but also the Vale of Leven, the Alexandria, Renton, and indeed right back into Dumbarton. So we're talking about the A82. That needs, and that's been on the go for as long as I can remember, to be looked at. So let's put that into perspective, and that's one of the big crunches. And only this morning I had a meeting with a business from Balloch, and one of the issues they were saying is let's get the infrastructure right, and then we can look at things properly. But as I suggested in this chamber before, tourism plans such as those that are now withdrawn should not be implemented at the expense of local residents. In cases such as this, it is opinions that must be protected and listened to, and local and public authorities need to be certain, as I said already, that there will be no irredeemable and negative impact on what we should feel privileged to have already. We have an abundance of beauty on our doorstep, the Bonnie Banks, as Rona Mackay quite rightly said, and therefore how it is treated is a top concern to many of my constituents and regional members, as well as for myself. Exploring alternatives into how best to use the space we have needs to be done with sensitivity and understanding, and including community buyouts. Whilst I do believe it's important for these communities to benefit from the investment that new developments can bring, this national park undoubtedly has a certain character and feel that they need to be kept in mind for whatever the next step is. We must also bear in mind the knock-on effect of traffic, to which I've already referred, and this will only worsen with another tourist event on the site, unless an infrastructure review is carried out. And perhaps, for now, maintaining better what we have already here is a solution, and we need to focus on that. And to close, Deputy Presiding Officer, any future development must be done openly and reflect the local residents' input. And I know the Minister has already commented on that before, and we need to accept that. And I put a question to her in this chamber. And whatever option is followed, its viability, expense and impact on both the surrounding environment and local residents must be taken into very serious consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. I call Mark Ruskell.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer, and can I thank Ross Greer for securing this debate, and also thank the work of the Save Loch Lomond campaign in securing a record-breaking level of objections to the Flamingo land development. The number of people who've objected is nearly a capacity crowd at Murrayfield, a national roar of disapproval, and it has sent a clear message on behalf of all communities in the national park that the integrity of our local environment has to be at the heart of all development. It has also sent a very clear message that publicly owned land must be managed in the democratic public interest. Now, attend any community council across Scotland, and the local environment is always the top agenda item. Sometimes the arguments around development are genuinely balanced. For example, at Balmahar, between the need for affordable housing and woodland protection. But more often than not, there's a development which attempts to bulldoze the agreed local development plan, bypass planning policies and dazzle decision makers with a glittering economic prize, which then only unravels under closer examination. The long game tactics of developers are well understood. Grind the community down, lobby politicians ahead of submission, and then if the application takes a battering with objections, withdraw and resubmit again and again and again until the right batch of decision makers come into office. But I believe in this case, the Flamingo Land people have pecked off far more than they can chew. In this case, it's also lamentable that Scottish Enterprise appear to be acting in the interests of one enterprise, rather than the wider interests of the community and Scotland as a whole. Parts of this site clearly have the potential for development, but this has to be steered by the community. And the balance will be a fine one to maintain the iconic sense of place of the Loch, while growing genuinely accessible and sustainable tourism. Now, I heard that at the recent public meeting on alternative plans, there was a lot of support for Balloch to be a hub for ecotourism, with an easy-to-use network of buses and boats to get people around. Now, from my perspective, certainly a shuttle bus service out to Rowadennan with space for bikes, a little bit like the old Trossachs-Trundler service, would make that road safer, it would cut congestion, it would also improve the environment of the West Highland Way. We need to improve the visitor experience while showcasing a pristine environment through sensitive yet accessible gateways to the park. And that's why the key objective of decreasing car usage while increasing public transport and active travel is a key objective in the National Park Plan. And it must also be an objective for the other park gateways, especially Callander, which still desperately needs to be linked up to the National Cycle Network through Doon to the east. Now, there are so many great ways that ecotourism can integrate well with the land, but they're not through gated villages. Comrie Crofts, which I'm sure the Minister, if she hasn't visited it already, will be on her tour at some point, has been a real economic marvel for Strathearn, hosting glamping experiences largely hidden in the woods, with walks, bike trails and facilities growing organically on the site over the last decade. New businesses have sprung up on the back of the success as demands for weddings, catering and bike services have grown, along with the visitor numbers. And now other communities, including Clackmannan, are looking to emulate that Comrie Croft model. It shows what can be done from the bottom up, creating world-class facilities, but with an integrity that reflects the wild and iconic nature of Scotland. For me and many thousands of people who treasure Scotland's wild environment, that is what we search for when we visit Loch Lomond.
Thank you. And I call on Mary Goujon, the Close to Government Minister, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And I really want to thank Ross Greer for bringing this debate forward, because I absolutely understand the passion behind this issue, which I felt from all members that have spoken in the debate today. Because as Minister responsible for natural parks, I would say that it's one of the benefits, one of the many benefits of my job, that it's a place that I get to actually spend a lot more of my time and appreciate. And that's something that was stated around the Chamber today by Rona Mackay, by Maurice Corrie, talking about Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park being one of our finest and most valued assets. And every year, I think that we can see that through the numbers that visit the park every year, because they welcome around 4 million visitors, which is testament to its appeal and its importance to the people of Scotland and to those from further afield. And I would hope that members will appreciate it's not appropriate for me and not possible for me to comment on the individual application. I recognise that there has been significant local and national interest in this development. And there were a number of issues raised across the Chamber today, and I realise that some of those may fall within the remit of some of my colleagues, but what I will commit to do is raise those issues with my colleagues and ensure that you get the responses to those that you need. And I'm also happy to meet with anybody in the Chamber today who wants to discuss any of these issues forward, if you feel like you do have more questions after I've spoken today. Because what I would really like to reflect on first and foremost is the contribution Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park and its local communities make to the area. Balancing the different statutory aims lies at the heart of the Park Authority's work, and these aims are around conserving the natural and cultural heritage of the area, promoting the sustainable use of the natural resources of the area, promoting understanding and recreation, and promoting sustainable and economic development of the area. And the Park Authority delivers these in a number of ways. As the planning authority, the park develops the local development plan for the area in consultation with stakeholders and communities, making sure that the plan is produced in an open and transparent way. And the authority received recognition for its approach to community involvement in the current local development plan for the park in 2015 by receiving the overall award at the Scottish Awards for Quality in Planning. Now, the plan is the blueprint for the area, setting out policies and priorities for how land is used, and is the basis on which all applications, including West Riverside, are considered. But the plan, of course, is only one part of the jigsaw. The Park Authority works hard to make sure there is ongoing, meaningful and innovative dialogue with communities about planning. For example, the Charette and Balloch identified opportunities and priorities to support the Strathard community, which is now driving action to regenerate Aberfoyle, which is the area's biggest village. This is a great example of the dual role the Park Authority undertakes, providing support and enabling positive action to deliver the local development plan and the park's aims. And when it comes to tourism, the park is always looking to try new ideas and deliver improvements too. Just last year, it hosted open water swimming event as part of the successful 2018 European Championships. And the local development plan itself also identifies opportunities to develop tourism in the area. And I was really interested to hear some of Mark Ruskell's contribution there. We were talking about the potential to grow and ecotourism, as well as some of the issues that had been raised by Maurice Corrie in terms to what that means in relation to transport. Now, looking ahead, I'm pleased that at a national level, the new Planning Act will bring about better, more meaningful and earlier engagement with local people right across Scotland. And that very much reflects the approach which has been taken by the Park Authority. On community engagement, the Parks 2017 Partnership Plan was developed with and for the local community and stakeholders. It sets out the vision and priorities for how communities and partners can work together for the park. The Park Authority is committed to building the skills and confidence of its communities, and that's delivered a strong network of community development trusts and community action plans. These community-led plans are well established and have supported a range of aspirations, from new village halls to community hydro schemes and path improvements. Now, in terms of the specific application, members know, and it has been raised today, that an exclusivity agreement is in place. Now, from what I understand, that agreement is in place until December next year, unless it's terminated by mutual agreement prior to that. And again, if members do have further questions about that or they would like to know more, then please do contact me. But that's the information that I have here at the moment. Jackie Bailey also asked about the conditions, and again, I'd be happy to try and establish. I don't know the nature of exactly what it is possible to disclose as part of these agreements, but again, that's something that I'd be happy to look into. More widely, encouraging community ownership is a priority for the Scottish Government, and Jackie Bailey raised this, and she is absolutely right. There are now a number of routes for communities across the country to take advantage of the opportunities that ownership can bring. Now, there are various community rights to buy, some of which are compulsory purchase routes. There's asset transfer, which allows communities to take control of assets currently owned by public bodies. The Scottish Land Fund, which has an annual budget of £10 million, provides communities with the financial opportunity to take ownership, no matter which of those routes they choose to take. Now, together with measures like the guidance on engaging communities in decisions relating to land and the Land Rights and Responsibilities Statement, communities now have more opportunity to take control of their futures than ever before. And just to close, Loch Lomond and the Trossachs is a great example of how a national park can work with its communities to deliver their aspirations. From its role as planning authority to delivering projects on the ground, the Park Authority works tirelessly for natural heritage, for cultural heritage, inclusive economic growth and the communities of the area. And I encourage the Park Authority to continue putting its energy into this to deliver a first-class place for all of its communities. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes the debate, and I close this meeting of Parliament.
Well, it's lovely to be out on such a sunny evening in Edinburgh, but it's a shame that we have to be out tonight protesting against the two-child cap and the rate clause, well more than a year since Alison Thewlis, my colleague at Westminster, first spotted it in the small print of a Tory budget.
Very glad to see such a huge demonstration today and so many people still coming along 1 year after the rate clause came into force to show their opposition to this vile and despicable policy. The UK government have never been able to justify this policy, and we saw that this week with Esther McVeigh's pathetic attempts to say that the rate clause was somehow double support for women and that gives them some kind of chance to talk about the most appalling and disturbing experience of their life.
As you can see behind me, we're at the very beginning of the All Under One Banner rally. You can obviously hear the pipers behind me as events are about to kick off.
It's time to aim high, look resolutely outwards, and never, ever accept second best. Above all, it's time to believe that we can. We can build that better country we know is possible. And friends, we will.
If you enjoy watching our programmes, please help us to be Scotland's independent broadcaster by signing up to become a Broadcasting Scotland supporter.
Wherever you stand, get the fresh view of what's happening in Scotland with iScot. Celebrate everything about our country with intelligent, in-depth insight from lifestyle, culture to puzzles, and all the opinions you'll need. Whether it's digital or by post, subscribe now to iScot.